You won a trip to the Caribbean in a sweepstakes. Well, if that's the case, Mommy and I are going. You're staying behind. Got it. If not, we're getting divorced, Andrew declared, his threat of divorce hanging in the air like a heavy cloud. His mother, standing beside him, wore a smirk of triumph, relishing the moment. I couldn't let this blatant manipulation slide. No, I would concoct my own special revenge against this conniving mother-son duo. My name is Lillian, aged 32, just your average working mother at some nondescript company. Andrew and I had been married for 2 years. I had stumbled upon him, 2 years my senior, through a mutual acquaintance. Romance was never my forte. I hadn't dated much during college and my post-graduation relationships hadn't panned out. Before I knew it, I was 30, and my concerned parents had begun seeking potential matches for me. Andrew appeared on the scene, a composed and caring individual with a strong devotion to his parents, a trait that resonated with my own values. Thinking perhaps I could forge a connection with him, I agreed to marry him. Our wedding was a smooth affair, celebrated by many, and initially, our union seemed to be pure bliss. About 6 months into our marriage, my phone began to ring incessantly, each call bearing Andrew's name. With a sense of urgency, I returned his call, only to be met with his strained voice on the other end. "Please try to stay calm," he began, his words heavy with distress. "It's about Dad. Something's happened to Alfred. He collapsed at home and has been rushed to the hospital." And then, it hit me like a wave. The sudden news of my father-in-law's passing was unfathomable. He had always been the epitome of health. The shock was palpable, not just for me, but for everyone involved. Following Alfred's passing, Andrew's attention shifted drastically towards his now solitary mother. He became excessively attentive, visiting her daily, sharing meals or accompanying her on shopping trips. He even took special leave to embark on a trip with her. It wasn't that he neglected me, but whenever our plans clashed, his priority was always her. "Sorry, Lillian, Mom just called and she needs me," he would say apologetically. "But we had plans," I'd protest, feeling the sting of disappointment. "She's feeling alone," he'd reason. "You don't mind, do you? You can go to the movies alone, can't you?" "I'm fine," I'd reply, though inwardly resentment brewed. Why was I the one being held accountable? Wasn't Matilda the one making demands? Regardless of Andrew's apparent devotion to his lonely mother-in-law, it's evident that he's a mama's boy. Yet aside from this recurrent issue with his mom, our marriage was tolerable. I presume this was simply the norm for married life. My personal refuge. Solving crossword puzzles with enticing prizes. They provided solace whenever Andrew abandoned me for Matilda, and occasionally, I'd score gift cards or delectable treats. Then came the day I clinched a pair of tickets to the Caribbean, the grandest prize I'd ever won. I meticulously verified my victory multiple times, consumed by exhilaration. The tickets necessitated specifying the travel companions before contacting the airline. Contemplating who to bring, Andrew naturally came to mind, but hesitations lingered. He often jetted off with Matilda, and if I proposed the trip together, she might insist on tagging along. After careful deliberation, I resolved to gift the trip to my parents. As I made my way home, I swung by my parents' place to share the thrilling news. "Mom, guess what? I've won tickets to the Caribbean," I announced, brimming with excitement. "Oh goodness, that's wonderful news. You and Andrew must be thrilled," Mom responded, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Not quite," I replied with a grin. "I've decided to give them to you and Dad." "To us? Are you sure?" Mom exclaimed, clearly taken aback. "Absolutely. Andrew's always traveling, but I want you two to have this experience," I reassured her. "Thank you, Lillian. We're beyond grateful," Mom beamed, her excitement palpable. Dad, however, appeared deep in thought. "Dad seems troubled," I observed. "Well, work's been hectic lately. It's not the best time for me to be away," Dad explained with a furrowed brow. "That's unfortunate," I acknowledged. Then Dad suggested, "Why not take Olivia instead? After all, it was your prize originally, wasn't it? Enjoy some quality time together." Mom's face lit up at the idea. "That sounds lovely." Feeling elated and increasingly excited, I applied for leave the next day, which was promptly approved. I wasted no time contacting the airline to arrange for my parents to use the tickets. On my way home from work, I stopped by a bookstore and purchased a guidebook for the Caribbean trip. It had been far too long since Mom and I had gone on an adventure together, and I couldn't wait to make new memories. But upon arriving home, I was met with an unexpected sight. I'm home, I called out upon entering, expecting to find Andrew, but instead discovering the house illuminated by lights. Oddly, there were women's shoes at the entrance rather than Andrew's. Contemplating this, I was met with the sight of Matilda as she swung open the living room door. "Lillian, do you have any idea what time it is?" she scolded. "Oh, Matilda, I didn't realize you were here," I responded, taken aback. "It's not just about me being here. Coming home this late, what have you been up to?" "Andrew will be back any minute now," she continued, her tone accusatory. "I'm sorry, I'll start dinner right away," I offered, hoping to diffuse the tension. "It's not just about dinner, is it? Making the bed is basic common sense for a daughter-in-law. Do you even take your role seriously?" Matilda questioned sharply. "I apologize if things have fallen short because of my work. Perhaps you should consider being more dedicated to your home," I retorted, feeling the weight of her disapproval. With Matilda living nearby and holding a spare key, her unannounced visits were a regular occurrence. Embracing traditional beliefs about a daughter-in-law's duties, she clearly disapproved of my full-time job. Her constant nitpicking and criticism made it difficult for me to warm up to her. As I began preparing dinner, Matilda suddenly exclaimed, "Hold on. What's this, Lillian? Are you planning a trip to the Caribbean?" Surprised, she had unearthed the newly purchased guidebook from my bag. "Matilda, why are you going through my things?" I protested. "That's beside the point. What's this about the Caribbean?" she demanded, her tone sharp. I had won the trip in a sweepstakes, intending to gift it to Mom. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone yet. Our argument was abruptly halted by Andrew's arrival. Matilda rushed to him, pointing an accusatory finger in my direction. "Andrew, listen to this. Lillian's been utterly thoughtless." "What's going on, Mom? Did Lillian pull one of her stunts again? A Caribbean trip, planning to give it to Olivia without even consulting me." "What Caribbean trip? This is news to me too," Andrew demanded, glaring at me. "It's quite simple. I won the trip and thought of giving it to my parents. But since Dad can't go, you're going with Olivia," I explained calmly. "Yeah, so what's the problem? You're always traveling with Matilda," Andrew retorted. "It's not the same. Mom and I only go on domestic trips. We haven't been abroad in years. How could you decide this without even talking to me? It's my prize. Why should I have to?" I protested, feeling my frustration rise. Andrew slammed his hand on the table, cutting me off. "You're getting too bold for a daughter-in-law. Mommy and I are going. You'll stay home." "Mommy?" I couldn't hide the disdain in my voice at Andrew's juvenile choice of words. "Wait a minute. This trip, you've had enough of it. If you're not happy, let's talk about divorce," Andrew declared sharply. "What divorce?" I was taken aback, unable to comprehend his extreme reaction. Threatening divorce over something so trivial seemed absurd. Fueled by anger, I fired back. "I earned this trip fair and square. I've already made up my mind to gift it to my own mother. Can't you pick up on the signals for once? Mom wants to go. Where does it end with prioritizing Matilda? You never take my feelings into consideration." "I don't care how you feel. Like I said, this trip is for Mommy and me. Stay home and behave." Andrew dismissed me coldly. My affection for Andrew waned rapidly in that moment. It was clear that in his eyes I ranked lower than Matilda. I couldn't continue to tolerate this absurd dynamic between the two of them. Keeping my composure, I told Andrew, "Fine. Do as you please and enjoy your trip." "Humph, you should have listened to reason from the beginning." "Suit yourself." Always being argumentative, Andrew huffed in response. The Andrew I once knew, kind and understanding, seemed to have vanished, and there was Matilda, wearing a smug smirk of victory. It was then that I made up my mind to leave the house while they were away on their trip. I resolved to let Andrew and Matilda have this time together. The following day, I reached out to the airline to inform them of the change in travelers, substituting Andrew and my mother-in-law. However, the operator's response carried a note of concern. "I'm sorry, but once the participants are confirmed, we're unable to modify them," they explained. "Is that so?" I inquired, a sinking feeling settling in. "Yes. Additionally, this airline ticket stipulates that the original winner must be present. If your husband and mother-in-law are listed, the ticket will be rendered invalid," the operator clarified. "So, if I don't go, the ticket serves no purpose," I confirmed. "Correct. Please refer to the documents we provided, outlining this specific condition," they advised. Upon reviewing the documents, I discovered a clear statement. Only the winner was authorized to use the ticket, and it was non-transferable. Relaying this information to the operator, I made the decision to decline the trip without informing Andrew and Matilda. Instead, I resolved to let them make their own arrangements for travel at their own expense. That evening, upon my return from work, I broached the topic of the Caribbean trip with Andrew. Andrew, about the trip to the Caribbean. Yeah, you've contacted the airline, right? Informing them that Mommy and I will be going, he interrupted. I did make the call. Here are the winning documents and the tickets. I'd only need the tickets. I won't bother with the documents, I explained, handing them over. There are detailed instructions in those documents. Considering it's an international trip, it might be wise to give them a read, Andrew suggested cautiously. I don't see the need. Mommy and I know what we're doing. We're efficient, unlike you, he asserted confidently. Fine, whatever. I'll leave them here just in case. I relented, sensing it was futile to argue further. As I anticipated, Andrew neglected to read the documents, leading to a debacle on the day of the trip. After confirming his departure, I swiftly packed my bags and made my way to my parents' house. While unpacking as expected, I received a call from Andrew. As soon as I answered, he erupted, "What's going on? They're saying the ticket can't be used." That's correct. If the winner doesn't travel, the ticket becomes void, I explained calmly. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? Andrew demanded, his tone accusatory. I did tell you. Remember? It would have been wise to read the instructions. I reminded him. You mean it was in those documents you gave me? Andrew realized with frustration. Exactly. It's your responsibility for not reading them, I replied matter-of-factly. This is ridiculous. How are we supposed to get to the Caribbean? Andrew panicked. Well, the operator did mention that if the winner doesn't travel, you'd have to pay the full price, I informed him. The full price? Andrew exclaimed, clearly caught off guard. In the background, I could hear Matilda's voice, indicating they were both distressed. Andrew, what did Lillian say? Matilda's voice interjected. Mommy, if Lillian doesn't have to pay for the trip, Andrew began, but I didn't catch the rest of his sentence as he handed the phone to Matilda. They can sort it out themselves, I heard Andrew mutter before ending the call. After ending the call, it wasn't long before Andrew rang again. Hello, I answered. What's going on? I'm busy, Andrew snapped. It's not what's going on. I tried to purchase the tickets, but the credit card isn't working, he exclaimed in frustration. Huh? I don't know anything about your card, I responded, puzzled. It's not mine, it's your card, he clarified. Oh, so you're saying you used my card without my permission? I realized with a sinking feeling. Just fix it now, Andrew demanded impatiently. I recalled checking my wallet earlier that morning and discovering my card missing. Suspecting the worst, I immediately froze it. I knew you took it, I accused. Are you kidding me? I was planning to use that card for shopping abroad. Andrew retorted defensively. Always causing problems, you jerk. I seethed with anger. You freaking witch? Andrew fired back, showing no remorse for his actions or for taking the trip. It was yet another instance of him prioritizing himself above all else. I can't deal with this anymore, I declared, my frustration boiling over. A jerk? Who are you calling that? After constantly belittling others, you can just go to hell. Andrew shot back defensively. What? Who are you talking to like that? I countered sharply. Who do you think? Your constant reliance on Mommy is honestly creepy. If you love her so much, why don't you two just stick together? I can't handle being married to a mama's boy like you. There's no point in us being together. I lashed out, my words dripping with disdain. Hey, calm down. If you keep this up, we'll get a divorce, Andrew warned. Fine by me. I've been thinking the same thing, I retorted, my anger flaring. With that, I stormed out of the house with no intention of returning. Let them enjoy their time abroad in the Caribbean. Maybe they'll both sink, they and Mama's boy. In a fit of rage, I hung up and blocked both Andrew and his mother. Determined to end this toxic relationship, I sought legal advice from a firm recommended by my father and initiated the divorce process. Upon reviewing our savings for asset division, I made a startling discovery. Our joint account had been emptied. That was the shocking discovery I made upon reviewing our joint account. There were numerous withdrawals, all coinciding with Andrew's trips with his mother. It became evident that he had used our savings to fund their travels in addition to unauthorized charges on my credit card. Demanding compensation, I insisted on a significant sum. However, Andrew's financial situation quickly spiraled into debt, and he found himself hounded by creditors. The once indulged mother, now constrained by her actions, witnessed her relationship with Andrew sour, their interactions fraught with arguments. The irony wasn't lost on me, considering his past behavior. Meanwhile, I made the decision to reside with my parents for a period. Recognizing the concern I had caused, I was determined to repay their kindness by living with them and attending to their needs. Marriage held little appeal for me now. What truly mattered was the love and support of a caring family. Through the tumult of divorce, I found solace in this realization once again.
My name's Erica. Grew up poor, which meant you either got tough or got left behind. My family wasn't much, just me, Ma, and Pa. We scraped by in a cramped house, the walls thin as paper. Early on, Ma put a needle in my hand, saying, "Stitch your own path, girl." And so I did. School was just the place I waited till I could get back to sewing. Teachers talked about math and history, but my mind was on fabrics and patterns. By 15, I was mending jeans and jackets for folks in the neighborhood. Life took a real turn when I met Tom. He was the cousin of my best bud, Sarah. I remember that day clear as crystal. We were at Sarah's family barbecue, and he was there, flipping burgers and laughing loud enough to scare the birds. "Hey, Erica." Sarah waved me over, a big grin on her face. "Come meet my cousin, Tom. He's been dying to meet the girl who fixed his favorite jacket." Tom wiped his hands on his apron and reached out. "That was you? Hell, you saved my life with that fix." I laughed, brushing a loose strand of hair from my face. "It was just a few stitches." "A few stitches," she says. Tom chuckled, giving me a look like I just pulled a rabbit out of a hat. "You're too modest, Erica." We hit it off straight away. He was easygoing, the kind of guy who'd give you the shirt off his back and make a joke while doing it. The more we talked, the more I liked him. He was genuine, a rare thing in this world. Tom was a truck driver, always on the road. Said it was lonely sometimes, watching the world through a windshield with no one to share the view. "It's just me and the long haul, but I'd love someone to come back to," he admitted one evening, the sunset making shadows dance on his face. Tom was the kind of man who never said no, especially to his family. He'd often joke about it, saying how his big sister Linda got everything she ever wanted from him. "She's got me wrapped around her finger, but don't you worry, Erica. I've got plenty of yes left for you." I'd roll my eyes and jab back, "Better save the best ones for me, Tom." He'd laugh and pull me close, and in those moments, I knew we were right for each other. He was kind and a pushover for sure, but me? I was the punchy one, and together, we balanced out just right. Love hit fast, and we married just as quickly. It felt right, like stepping into a story that was meant just for us. Life with Tom was never dull, even when the road took him away more often than I liked. He was out there driving his truck, traversing from one city to another, while I kept the home fires burning and the sewing machine humming. You could say I had become quite the thrifty one over the years. Every penny from my sewing gigs went straight into a jar, and before we knew it, there was $20,000 saved up. It wasn't just pocket change, it was our ticket to something bigger. One evening, Tom rolled in, tired but happy to be home. I was stitching up a storm in the corner of our living room turned makeshift studio. The hum of the machine paused as I made my pitch. "Tom, what if we stop just making ends meet and start planning to get ahead? I've been saving up. We've got enough to put down on a new truck." Tom, who was halfway through a sandwich, stopped and looked up. "You serious, Erica? That's a lot of dough. You've been stashing away that much?" "Yeah, and it's just sitting there. Imagine if you could run your own gigs, choose your routes. We could pay off the lease with the extra jobs you take." He set his sandwich down, wiping his hands on his jeans, his brain ticking over. Could work. I'm sick of hauling for pennies for the other guy. Running my own show could mean real money. So, we did it. We found a decent truck, not the newest model, but reliable enough to handle the long hauls Tom was planning. The day we went to look at it, Tom was like a kid in a candy store, checking every part, talking shop with the dealer, so I barely kept up. "Erica, she's solid, good mileage, engine's in top shape. We take care of her, she'll take care of us," he said, his eyes not leaving the truck. I nodded, trusting his judgment. "Let's do it then. Let's buy our future." And we did. Papers signed, handshakes exchanged, and the keys were in his hand. Tom got his license sorted out for the new routes we'd scoped out, and soon he was taking orders for intercity trips. Money was tight at first, every cent counted even more than before. But Tom was pulling in enough jobs to keep us on track with the lease payments. Meanwhile, I didn't sit idle. My sewing had turned from a side hustle into a serious business. Enough so, that 3 years down the line, I opened my own small studio. It wasn't much, just a little space I rented out on the main street. The start was rocky, clients trickling in slow. But I kept at it, word of mouth started doing its thing, and my little studio began to see regulars. It was another 2 years of hustle, but finally, things smoothed out. The studio was bringing in a stable income, and we made the last payment on the truck. All that money we used to pour into the lease? Now it was ours to keep. One night, over a quiet dinner, Tom and I decided it was time for the next big step. "We've been doing good, Tom. Really good. Maybe it's time we thought about getting a place of our own. A real house, not this cramped apartment." Tom, who'd been quietly listening, nodded. "I've been thinking the same. We've worked hard, Erica. We deserve it." So, we started house hunting, and before long, we found a small townhouse. It was perfect for us, just enough space, a little yard, and a room that I could turn into a proper studio. We moved in, and it felt like a fresh start. Everything we'd worked for was finally coming together. After we settled into our new townhouse, Tom and I decided it was high time we took a break. We packed up and headed out to visit his mom, who lived a few cities over. Since Tom's dad passed, his mom had been living with his sister, Linda, and her 2 kids. Tom's mom was a sweet lady, always had been good to me. But Linda, well, that's another story. She and I never really saw eye to eye. Something about the way I came up, made my own way, she didn't like it, always hinting that I was just lucky. We pulled up to their house, a cozy little place with toys scattered across the front yard. Tom's mom greeted us with hugs and homemade cookies, her warmth a comforting blanket. But Linda, she just nodded, her smile tight, eyes scanning us like we were pages in a book she didn't want to read. Dinner was tense from the get-go. Linda cooked, which I made sure to compliment, but you could cut the tension with a knife. As we sat down, the small talk fluttered around, never landing anywhere substantial until Linda, stirring her drink, turned to me. "So, Erica, how's that little sewing business of yours? Making good money?" Her tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp, prodding. I paused, fork in midair. "It's a studio, Linda, and it's doing well, thanks." "And Tom's trucking? I bet that's bringing in plenty, huh?" She was leaning in now, her voice a mix of curiosity and something darker. I set my fork down, my appetite waning. "Linda, I don't think it's very polite to dig into people's finances at the dinner table." I tried to change the subject, asked about her kids, her life. But Linda was like a dog with a bone, wouldn't let it go. The evening spiraled from there, her questions peppering the air until I couldn't take another bite. "I think I'm full," I said abruptly, pushing my chair back. "Thanks for dinner." I could feel Tom's eyes on me, the weight of an apology in his gaze. I headed to the living room, the echo of their whispers trailing me. Later, when Tom found me looking out the window, the room was dark, save for the streetlights casting shadows. He came up behind me, his voice low. "Sorry about Linda. She's always been a bit much." I turned to face him, his features drawn in the dim light. "Why do you let her talk to you, or to us, like that?" He shrugged, a helpless gesture that didn't sit right with me. I guess I'm used to giving in to her. Keeps the peace, you know? But at what cost? I pressed, my voice firm. She walks all over you because she knows she can. And now me? Tom ran a hand through his hair, the lines of his face deepening. I know. It's just complicated. She's been having a hard time since Dad passed, and Mom relies on me to not stir things up. I sighed, stepping closer. I get it, Tom, but it's not right. You can't let her push us around, make us uncomfortable in our own family. Where does it end? The next dinner was just as stressful. I tried to make conversation about benign things, hoping to keep the evening light, but Linda had other plans. She wasted no time, diving straight into dangerous waters. You know, since you two have done so well for yourselves, she started, her voice dripping with a mix of envy and accusation. I think it's only fair that you think about the rest of us who haven't been so lucky. Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking anywhere but at his sister. I clenched my fork a little tighter, feeling the calm before the storm. Linda continued, undeterred by our silence. In fact, I think it's only right if you two give up your claim on Mom's property. After all, you don't need it. I do. I was stunned. Discussing inheritance in front of Tom's mother, who was very much alive and sitting right there, was beyond inappropriate. It was disrespectful. Linda, I can't believe you're bringing this up now, I said, my voice low and steady. It's Mom's decision, not ours or yours. But Linda plowed ahead, her voice rising. Oh, come on, Erica. You don't need the money. You don't need the house. I'm here with 2 kids, trying to make ends meet. It should be mine. I need it more than you do. Tom looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. He hated confrontation, especially with his sister, but even he looked like he might speak up this time. Before he could, however, his mom intervened. That's enough, Linda, she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. I've already discussed this with my lawyer. The house will go to you and the children, and the money I've saved will go to Tom. That's final. Linda's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen before. But the house is old. And Erica doesn't need the money, they make plenty. Tom's mom fixed a stern gaze on her daughter. The house being old doesn't change my decision, and it's not your place to comment on Erica's finances. What you need to do is stop counting on others and maybe get a job to support your children. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Linda, mouth snapped shut and cheeks burning, didn't utter another word. Dinner ended quietly, and the rest of the evening passed with minimal interaction. The remainder of the week, I spent a lot of time with Tom's mom. The day we were leaving, she pulled me aside, handing me a small, ornate box. This has been in the family for years, she said, her eyes locking onto mine. It's filled with coins from different countries. I've added to it over the years. I want you to have it, to remember me by. I was touched, unsure what to say. Thank you, I will cherish it. Study them when I'm gone, she added, a hint of mystery in her tone. There's more to them than meets the eye. We hugged, a long, tight embrace that said everything words couldn't. It had been a month since our last, somewhat strained, visit to see Tom's mom. Life had slipped back into its normal rhythm, Tom returning from a long haul on the road and me buried in fabric and threads at my studio, rushing to meet an urgent order. That ordinary afternoon shattered with a single phone call. Tom answered his phone, his face draining of color as he listened. Linda? His voice was tight, worried. After a pause, his shoulders slumped. Oh, no. Okay, I'll be there. He hung up, looking lost. What happened? I asked, my heart sinking at his expression. It's Mom. She passed away, Tom managed, his voice barely a whisper. I felt a chill run down my spine. I'm so sorry, Tom. When's the funeral? Tomorrow, he replied, the word heavy between us. Tomorrow? That's so soon. Why didn't Linda tell us sooner? I frowned, concern lacing my tone. Tom shook his head, just as confused and frustrated. Before he could respond, I snatched the phone from the table and dialed Linda back, my pulse racing with a mix of anger and dread. "Linda, why are we only hearing about this now? And why so rushed?" I demanded as soon as she picked up. "Erica, this really isn't your concern. I've been too upset, and we're trying to respect Mom's wishes," Linda snapped, her voice cold. "And what wishes are those?" I pushed, needing to understand her hurried decisions. "Mom said only blood relatives should attend the funeral. That's why we're keeping it small. Just family, not you," Linda explained, a bit too quickly. Tom, overhearing the conversation, gently interjected, "If that's what Mom wanted, then we should respect her wishes. I'll go alone." Linda's response was almost too quick. "Yes, that's best. I'll see you soon, Tom." After hanging up, the silence in our home was stifling. I helped Tom pack, folding his clothes quietly, my mind racing with doubts about Linda's intentions. Despite my misgivings, I booked Tom's train ticket online, each click a reminder of the distance this situation was putting between us. He hugged me, tight and long, then stepped out into the fading light of day. I watched as he drove off, feeling a mix of sorrow for his loss and irritation at Linda's vague explanations and hurried arrangements. The quiet in the house was heavy, the kind that weighs on you, makes every little noise seem louder. I couldn't shake the sinking feeling in my gut. Why hadn't his mom wanted me at the funeral? We had a good thing, a genuine respect for each other. It didn't add up. Dragging my feet back inside, I noticed the small, ornate box on the mantel, one that Tom's mom had entrusted to me during our last, happier visit. I sat down, the box in my lap, my fingers tracing the intricate patterns carved into the wood before I finally opened it. Inside, nestled among various old coins from around the world, was a folded piece of paper, clearly her handwriting visible even before I pulled it out. Unfolding the note, I read her words, each one a mix of warmth and warning. "My dear Erica, thank you for the laughter and strength you brought into our family. Please, make sure you are with Tom at my funeral. I know Linda well, she will try to sway him to give up his rightful share, playing on his kind nature. I trust you to stand by him, as he may not have the heart to stand up to her alone." I read it twice, then a third time, each word sinking in deeper. Linda had lied. She'd played us all, hoping to manipulate Tom in my absence. Rage bubbled up inside me, not just for the deception, but for the sheer audacity of her plan. I grabbed my phone and dialed Tom's number, pacing the room as it rang. "Erica? What's up?" "I'm still at the station," Tom answered, his voice tired. "You need to wait for me, please. Don't get on that train. I'm on my way." I didn't wait for his response. I ended the call, grabbed my bag, and headed out the door. My mind was racing as I hailed a taxi to the station. Traffic seemed to conspire against me, every red light a barrier to my urgency, but I made it just in time. Walking into Tom's late mother's house felt like stepping onto a stage where a drama was already in progress. The moment Linda saw both of us, her face twisted in a mix of surprise and anger. She almost sputtered. "What are you doing here, Erica? Nobody called you." I met her glare steadily. "I came to say goodbye to your mother," I said simply. Linda huffed, turning away to hide the fury in her eyes. The funeral was a modest affair. I stayed at the back during the ceremony, saying my silent goodbyes to a woman who had shown me nothing but kindness. Afterward, everyone returned to the house. The mood was somber as we gathered in the living room, waiting for the notary to arrive and read the will. Linda paced nervously, casting glances at me that could freeze boiling water. When the notary finally cleared his throat and opened his briefcase, everyone settled down. "As per the last will and testament of Marjorie Ellen Davis," he began, his voice formal and echoing slightly in the hushed room. Linda's eyes were locked on the papers as the notary read through the legal jargon to the heart of the matter. "To Linda, I bequeath the family home and all contained within. To Thomas, I bequeath the sum of $400,000. The reaction was immediate. Linda's face crumpled into tears, her sobs theatrically loud. But how can I live in that house? It's falling apart. I have no job, how will I provide for my children? Tom, ever the soft heart, looked at his sister with something akin to guilt. His eyes met mine, filled with a turmoil that said he was torn by his sister's pleas. The notary, unfazed by the display, asked if there were any questions. Linda, through her tears, begged Tom directly. Please, Tom, think of my kids. They're your nieces. We need that money more than you. Tom opened his mouth, likely to offer some kind of compromise, that was his nature. But I couldn't stand it anymore. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. Linda's sobs hiccuped into a shocked silence. Enough, Linda, I said, my voice steady and clear. Everyone in the room turned to look at me, surprised by the force in my voice. I know what you've been trying to do, and it's going to stop, right now. I pulled out the note, unfolding it with shaking hands, but a firm resolve. I read it aloud for everyone, my voice echoing in the suddenly quiet room. Please make sure you are with Tom at my funeral. I know Linda well, she will try to sway him to give up his rightful share, playing on his kind nature. Linda's face went from sad to furious in a heartbeat. When I finished, she looked around, seemingly gauging if anyone would come to her defense. When no one did, she finally spoke, her voice venomous. I deserve that money more than he does, she spat, standing up to face us all. I have kids to care for, a house that's falling apart. Why shouldn't I have it? It was Tom's turn to stand. Because it's not what Mom wanted, Linda, he shouted, louder than I'd ever heard him before. You've always used me, always expected me to just roll over and do what you say, because you're my sister. Well, not anymore. Linda recoiled as if he'd struck her, her face a mask of disbelief. She stared at him, her mouth open, tears stopping as if cut off by a switch. I'm taking the inheritance Mom left me, and I'm putting it where it can do some good, Tom continued, his voice firm and resolute. The shock on Linda's face gave way to real tears, tears of defeat, not manipulation. She sobbed, covering her face with her hands, her act finally crumbling under the weight of Tom's declaration. We didn't stay much longer after that. Tom took my hand, and we walked out together, leaving Linda to her reality. As we drove home, the car was filled with a tense silence. Finally, Tom spoke, his voice quiet but strong. I'm sorry for all this, Erica. For letting it go on this long. After securing the inheritance, we made some big moves. We split the $400,000, investing it smartly into both our futures. It felt good, right, even, to put that money to use in ways that would honor the memory of Tom's mom. First off, we bolstered the atelier. I hired a couple of skilled assistants and expanded our workspace. It was amazing to see my dream of a bustling studio come to life, filled with creativity and the steady hum of sewing machines. Looks like you're building an empire here, Tom joked one afternoon as he watched us lay out fabric for a big order. Tom, on his side, didn't waste any time either. He used his share to buy 2 more trucks, expanding his fleet. Gotta keep up with you, Erica. Can't have you outdoing me in ambition, he'd said with a wink. Hiring drivers came next, and soon, he had his own small but thriving transport company. It was a proud moment for us both, signing off on those trucks, knowing they were entirely ours, no loans, no debts hanging over us. Speaking of debts, we finally paid off the mortgage on our townhouse. Passing that last check across the bank manager's desk felt like lifting a weight off our shoulders. All ours now, Tom had murmured as we walked back to the car, his arm snug around my shoulders. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. Our businesses were doing well, which meant we could take a bit more time to enjoy the little things. Long walks in the evening, weekend getaways when we could squeeze them in, and plenty of quiet nights at home, just enjoying each other's company. But it wasn't just business thriving in our lives. Recently, we got some news that added a whole new layer of excitement. Turns out, I'm pregnant. The day I found out, I couldn't wait for Tom to get home. I paced around the kitchen, the positive test clutched in my hand, waiting to drop the bombshell. When he finally walked in, I blurted it out before he could even take his coat off. "Tom, we're going to have a baby." He froze, then broke into the biggest grin I've ever seen. "Really? We're going to be parents?" His voice was a mix of disbelief and joy. "Yeah, we are," I said, laughing as he swept me up into his arms, spinning me around in pure happiness. As for Linda, well, we haven't had much contact with her. Last we heard, she'd had to find a job to support herself and the kids. It's tough, but maybe it's for the best. Learning to stand on her own might do her some good, I figure. It's funny how life works out. There were times when I thought we'd never see the end of the turmoil. Now, here we are, our lives full and expanding like my belly, new beginnings that feel just right. We've got plans, big ones, for our family and our businesses. And whatever comes, I know we'll handle it, together. Because that's what we do best. Growing up, the factory was just another member of our family, its hum and buzz as familiar as any relative's voice. Dad started it when I was just a toddler, building it from scratch into a name that every local grocery store wanted on their shelves. After he passed, it was up to me and my brother David to keep the wheels turning. "Gina, you ready to step up? This isn't kid stuff," David had said on the day we took over. He was older by just 3 years, but sometimes he acted like a gruff old man. "Yeah, I've been ready," I shot back, more confident than I felt. David had always been the face of the business, dealing with suppliers and buyers, while I was comfortable in the background, handling the team and making sure everyone was where they needed to be. We worked well together, our skills complementing each other. Things at the factory were running smoother than ever, but personal life, that was another story. I wasn't exactly social, preferring quiet evenings at home over parties or networking events. That changed when I met Tom. I remember that night clearly. It was one of those rare occasions I let David drag me to a business mixer. I was nursing a drink at the bar, planning my escape, when Tom sidled up beside me. "You look about as thrilled to be here as I am," he said, flashing a grin that caught me off guard. "I'm just here so my brother stops nagging about my hermit lifestyle," I replied, surprised at my own honesty. "Ah, siblings can be like that. I'm Tom, by the way," he said, extending his hand. "Gina," I shook his hand, his grip confident but not overpowering. Tom was a journalist, writing about the local business scene, which apparently included my family's cookie empire. He was clever, using his charm and wit to weave through topics, from mundane to personal. Before I knew it, I was laughing more freely than I had in months. "You really should let me write a piece on you. The heirs behind the cookies or something like that," Tom joked, or at least I thought he was joking. "Let's not," I said, more sharply than I intended. "I prefer keeping my life out of the papers." "Fair enough," he nodded, not pushing further, which I appreciated. Despite my initial resistance, Tom was persistent. He sent me messages, light and teasing at first, gradually becoming more frequent and personal. I found myself waiting for them, eager for the distraction from the everyday stress of business. David noticed the change in me. One evening, as we were closing up the office, he cornered me about it. "Who's the guy?" he asked bluntly. "What guy?" I tried to keep my face neutral. "Don't play dumb. You've been smiling at your phone like it's a love letter. Spill it." "It's Tom, the journalist from the mixer. We've been talking," I admitted, bracing for his reaction. David frowned, his protective instincts flaring up. "Just be careful, Gina. Guys like him, they can smell money and opportunity." 6 months later, I was walking down the aisle toward Tom, my heart full of hope for the future. The prenup was David's idea, and though Tom was not thrilled, he signed it. It was just a piece of paper, I told myself, a precaution that we'd never need. I believed in us, in the promise of what we could be together. Life with Tom started like a whirlwind. Suddenly, I was part of a glamorous world, often at arm's length with photographers snapping our pictures as we attended high-profile events. Tom thrived in the spotlight, using every outing as a chance to boost his online presence. One evening, as we were getting ready for another big gala, Tom was fussing more than usual. He held up 2 ties, a silver and a blue one, turning to me. "Which one?" "The silver is flashy, good for photos. But the blue, it pops on camera," he pondered out loud, genuinely torn. "Go with the blue, it suits you better," I said, keeping it simple, my mind more on the comfort of my heels than his tie color. Tom nodded and went with the blue, but not before taking a few selfies in the mirror. He posted them on his blog with the caption, "Which tie? Help me choose." He smiled at his phone as responses flooded in. At these events, I felt out of place. While Tom schmoozed, I often found myself tucked away in a corner, observing the crowd rather than being part of it. He would come over, every so often, to check on me, each time a bit more animated as the wine flowed. "Gina, you should try mingling a bit. People are dying to know more about the woman behind the cookie empire," Tom nudged one night, his speech slightly slurred. I nodded, not wanting to argue. It was his night, after all. As he walked away, I overheard him telling someone about his expansive lifestyle that our marriage had apparently granted him. It irked me how he spun our life together into content for public consumption. As the months rolled on, the pattern continued. Tom's blog grew, fueled by the snippets of our life he broadcasted. I became more reclusive, retreating into the sanctuary of my work at the factory. The cookie business was booming, and I threw myself into it, finding solace in the familiar chaos of production lines and staff meetings. David noticed the change in me. During one of our late-night check-ins at the factory, he leaned against a packing machine, a concerned look on his face. "You've been quiet. Everything okay with Tom?" he asked, his voice cutting through the noise of the warehouse. "It's fine. Just the usual ups and downs," I shrugged, not wanting to admit how strained things had become. "Gina, remember what I said. Money changes people. Be careful," David warned, his tone serious. "I know, David. I'm keeping my eyes open," I reassured him, though I felt anything but reassured. As I drove home that night, the factory's lights fading in my rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that the glamorous life Tom so loved was more of a facade, and I was trapped behind it, playing a part one never auditioned for. We worked well like that, but when the need for a new finance director came up, it fell on me to find the right fit. That's how Emily came into the picture. She was sharp and had a knack for numbers that impressed even David, which wasn't easy. Soon enough, she was not just crunching numbers at work, but also a regular at our home during the late-night strategy sessions David and I held. Tom usually just hovered around these meetings, glass of wine in hand, barely hiding his boredom. He never really got the business, nor did he try to. But with Emily's arrival, there was a shift. I noticed how his eyes followed her around, lighting up whenever she spoke about financial forecasts or new funding strategies. However, Tom's interest seemed more personal than professional. I brushed it off initially, chalking it up to his usual charm. He always did enjoy charming, intelligent women, and Emily fit that bill. Yet, something in my gut twisted a bit each time I saw them laughing together a little too closely for comfort. One evening, after Emily had left and Tom was in his study supposedly working on an article, I decided to clear the air. "Tom, got a sec?" I leaned on the doorframe of his study, watching him stare at his screen. He glanced up, a little startled. "Sure, what's up?" "It's about Emily. You guys seem to be hitting it off," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral but firm. Tom raised an eyebrow, his fingers pausing over the keyboard. "What do you mean?" "We're just talking shop. You know, business." "Yeah, I get that. Just seems like you're really into those conversations. Just making sure it's all it is," I pushed, needing to hear him say it. He chuckled, a bit too casually. "Gina, you're worrying about nothing. She's smart, got good ideas. That's all I'm interested in." As Tom went back to his typing, I couldn't shake off the discomfort. His reassurances did little to soothe the doubts creeping up on me. I found myself confiding in David more than ever during our late-night sessions after Emily and the other staff had left. "Everything okay with you and Tom?" David asked one night as we reviewed some shipment schedules. "It's fine. He's busy with his trips, and I'm here with the cookies." I shrugged, trying to sound nonchalant. David frowned, not buying it. "You know, I don't like that guy much. Always thought he was a bit slick." "Just watch yourself, Gina." "I am, David." "Thanks," I said, grateful for his concern but feeling the weight of my marital woes grow heavier. Despite this, life at home and work kept marching on. Tom's travels for whatever stories he was chasing became more frequent, and oddly enough, I was relieved. His trips meant fewer awkward dinners and less tension about him and Emily. I focused on the company, pushing those nagging thoughts aside. The factory was gearing up for a major expansion, and I threw myself into the work. The company was celebrating a record-breaking quarter, and David and I decided to throw a big party for the whole team. The venue was decked out, the music was lively, and the air was buzzing with laughter and chatter. Tom was there too, of course. He had his phone out, capturing everything for his blog. "This is going to be great content," he'd said, winking at me as he filmed the decorations and the crowd. I forced a smile, still uneasy about broadcasting our personal lives. As the party went on, I needed a break from the noise and slipped out to the quieter foyer. That's when I heard them, whispers that weren't meant for my ears. Curiosity piqued, I edged closer to the partition, my heart pounding in my chest. There was Tom in a far too intimate embrace with Emily. The sight knocked the wind out of me, but it was their words that cut deeper. "Just wait till Gina's money hits our account. We'll be out of here, away to our dream house abroad," Tom whispered, his voice thick with greed and deception. Emily giggled, her voice tinged with contempt. "Can you believe how clueless she is? What a stupid chicken." The room spun as their laughter pierced through me. They were using me, mocking me. The pain was sharp, raw, and it burned through my shock. I stood frozen, the urge to confront them wrestling with the need to protect what was left of my dignity. I chose the latter, stepping back into the shadows before they could see me. My mind raced as I walked back to the main hall. I needed support, I needed David. I found him chatting with a group of employees, his laughter a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. Pulling him aside, I whispered urgently, "David, we need to talk. Now." His face fell as he saw my expression. We found a quiet corner, and I poured out everything. The affair, the plans, their cruel words. David's face hardened with each word, his protective fury barely contained. "That son of a..." David's hands balled into fists. "And Emily? I can't believe she'd do this. We need to be smart, David. We can't let them destroy everything we've built," I said, my voice shaky but resolute. "You're right. We'll get the auditors on this first thing tomorrow. And a detective. We'll do this quietly, gather all the evidence we need to nail them both," David said, his tone ice cold. The rest of the night was a blur. I went through the motions, smiling and chatting, while inside, a storm raged. Tom came up to me several times, oblivious to the fact that I knew everything. Each time, it took all my strength not to reveal anything. The morning after the party, I was at the office early. David had arranged everything by the time I arrived. "They'll be here in an hour. I've told them it's a routine check, nothing to raise suspicions," he informed me as I stepped into his office. "Good, we can't tip them off." "Not yet," I replied, trying to steady my nerves. The auditors were thorough. They set up in one of the conference rooms with stacks of financial statements, invoices, and bank records. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting to the auditors and what they might find. Around mid-afternoon, one of the auditors called us into the conference room. "We need to discuss our preliminary findings," he said, his expression grave. The room felt suddenly too small, the air too tight. "What is it?" David asked, his voice tense. The lead auditor spread out several documents on the table. We found numerous irregular transactions. Large sums have been transferred to an external account over the past few months. Here, and here. He pointed to the highlighted lines on a bank statement. I felt a chill run down my spine. Whose account? I managed to ask, bracing myself for the answer. It's registered under Thomas Landon, the auditor replied, looking from me to David. My worst fears confirmed. I fought to keep my composure. What about any links to Emily Rogers? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. We're still looking into that, but given the patterns, it's likely we'll find a connection, the auditor answered. The next few days were a blur of meetings with lawyers and more sessions with the auditors. Each new piece of evidence was a stab in the heart, but also a building block towards the fortress of my revenge. I knew I had to be strong, for myself and for our family's company. As the auditors wrapped up their investigation, the private detective David had hired came in with his findings. He laid out photographs and receipts on David's desk, pictures of Tom buying a luxury car and expensive jewelry, not for me but for Emily. And there's more, the detective said grimly. They booked tickets to Mexico, 4 months from now. Looks like they plan to drain your accounts and run. David and I exchanged a glance, the final pieces clicking into place. He's also signed a contract with a major media company in Mexico, the detective added. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. Not only was Tom stealing from me, but he was also planning a whole new life with Emily, funded by the money he took from my company. Armed with this information, we finalized our plan. Legal and financial traps were set quietly, ensuring that when Tom and Emily tried to make their move, they'd find themselves with nowhere to go. The end of the year was approaching, and it brought with it the perfect opportunity to set my plan into motion. I decided to host a pre-Christmas celebration for the company. It was an annual event, typically a time for cheer and toasts, but this year, it was the stage for my carefully crafted retribution. The venue was a well-known restaurant, beautifully decorated with twinkling lights and festive garlands. Employees milled around, laughing and chatting, completely unaware of the drama about to unfold. Tom arrived, looking as dashing as ever and completely oblivious to my plans. He went straight to work, filming the decorations and guests, broadcasting live to his blog followers. Looking stunning, babe, Tom said, coming over to give me a quick peck on the cheek before returning to his video. Thanks, Tom. Make sure you get good shots, I said, my tone light, masking the storm inside. The evening progressed smoothly, and after dinner, it was time for the main event. I took the stage to give the annual awards to the employees. This was it. My heart was pounding as I called Emily up first. Let's hear it for Emily Rogers, everyone. This year's standout employee, I announced, my voice steady as applause filled the room. Emily beamed as she walked up, clearly pleased by the recognition. I handed her a beautifully wrapped gift box. Open it later, I whispered, and she nodded, oblivious to the trap. After a few more awards, it was Tom's turn. I saved him for last, making sure the cameras were still rolling. And now, for a special recognition. Tom, could you join me up here? I called out, my voice echoing through the room. Tom looked surprised but pleased as he made his way to the stage. What's this about? He whispered, as he joined me under the spotlight. Just a little something to show my appreciation, I said, handing him a similar gift box. Why don't you open it now, for everyone to see? Tom, ever the performer, played up his curiosity for the cameras, tearing into the wrapping paper. The moment the contents were revealed, his face went white. Divorce papers and photos of him with Emily. The room fell silent, all eyes on Tom. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He looked around, desperate, but there was no escape. And Emily, why don't you open your gift now too? I called out, my voice clear and strong. With shaky hands, Emily opened her box, pulling out receipts for the car Tom bought her, along with bank statements detailing the stolen money. Tom, usually so composed and confident, stood frozen. the live cameras, still broadcasting to his blog, captured every moment of his disgrace. There was nowhere for him to hide, no narrative he could spin that would undo the truth laid bare before his audience. I took a deep breath and addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing tonight is not just a revelation but a betrayal of the worst kind. I began, my voice steady but charged with emotion. For years, this man, I pointed to Tom, and his accomplice, my gaze shifted to Emily, have been siphoning funds from our company. They planned to flee to Mexico, thinking they could escape the consequences of their actions. The silence was palpable, the crowd hanging on every word. Tom, regaining some of his wits, blurted out in a desperate attempt to deflect the blame. It was all her idea. She seduced me into doing this. The accusation seemed to snap Emily out of her shock. She stormed onto the stage, her face contorted with rage. You liar! You came to me with the plan. You said we'd be free and rich. She lunged at him, her hands flying as she slapped and scratched, her voice piercing the stunned silence. The scuffle on stage was chaotic, with Tom trying to deflect Emily's blows and defend himself, both verbally and physically. The spectacle was not just being recorded but streamed live, drawing a massive online audience. David came up beside me, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. He then stepped forward, his voice booming over the microphone, cutting through the cacophony. Enough, he shouted. The police are already on their way. Both of you will face charges for fraud and theft. The evidence is overwhelming, and justice will be served. The police arrived minutes later, their entrance adding to the drama. They separated Emily and Tom, handcuffing them amidst the flash of cameras and the murmur of the shocked employees. This whole ordeal, broadcasted live, was a spectacle no one could have anticipated, drawing viewers from all over. As the police led them away, the room burst into whispers and murmurs, the employees processing the night's shocking events. I stood there, amidst the chaos, feeling a mix of relief and profound sadness. What had started as a festive celebration had turned into a public unveiling of betrayal. The live feed was still running, and I realized the camera was focused on me. Gathering my composure, I addressed the audience directly. Thank you for your support. Tonight was about bringing the truth to light, no matter how painful. We will rebuild, and we will emerge stronger. The support was immediate and overwhelming. Comments poured in, messages of solidarity and encouragement flooding the live feed. People praised my courage and even suggested I start my own blog to share my side of the story. David squeezed my shoulder. You did what you had to do, Gina. It's over now. But as I looked around at the remnants of the evening, the decorations that now seemed garish, the empty stage that had just hosted a confrontation, I knew it wasn't over. This was just the end of a chapter. There was much to do, relationships to mend, and a company to heal. I filed for divorce immediately and sued Tom for the financial havoc he'd wreaked through his deceit and fraud. The court ruled in my favor, and Tom was ordered to pay a hefty sum in compensation, money that would help stabilize the company's finances and ensure our employees didn't suffer because of his greed. Emily's fate was sealed in court. She was convicted of embezzlement, had to return all the stolen funds, and lost her financial license. The industry ban was the final nail in her professional coffin. Meanwhile, Tom's life unraveled spectacularly. The Mexican media company he'd planned to escape to terminated his contract when they caught wind of his criminal activities. No one else wanted to touch him, his reputation toxic and his professional network crumbled. His followers abandoned him, disgusted by his actions, forcing him to shut down his blog. One afternoon, as I was reviewing the quarterly performance reports in my office, Tom showed up unannounced. He looked defeated, a shadow of the man he once was. Gina, I'm so sorry. Can we talk? His voice was shaky, his eyes not meeting mine. I stood firm, the memories of his betrayal still fresh. There's nothing to talk about, Tom. You should leave, I said sternly. Please, Gina. I've lost everything. I just need a chance to explain, he pleaded, taking a step closer. I didn't budge. You had your chances, Tom. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a business to run. Without waiting for his response, I called security. Please escort Mr. Landon out. He was just leaving. Watching him being led away, I felt a chapter firmly closing behind me. I turned back to my desk, where the future lay, a future that was looking brighter each day. David came into my office, having heard about Tom's attempt to see me. You okay? He asked, looking concerned. I'm fine, David. Better than fine, actually, I replied, a genuine smile spreading across my face. It's over, and I'm ready to move forward. That's the spirit, David said with a grin. Speaking of moving forward, how's the blog idea coming along? I nodded enthusiastically. Actually, I'm thinking bigger. A video blog or vlog. To connect directly with our customers and share our journey. Transparency, recovery, innovation, make it a platform for dialogue. David's eyes lit up. Brilliant idea. It puts a face to the name, makes it personal. Let's not just bounce back, let's leap forward. As the vlog took shape, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was not just rebuilding a company, I was creating a community. Each video we posted built more engagement, more support. People appreciated the honesty and the efforts we were making to ensure such betrayals never happened again. Hey there, I'm Emma Clark. Born and raised in the small town of Harlow, nothing fancy, just a place where faces are familiar and secrets don't stay hidden for long. I made my way through college, diving straight into the world of retail after graduation. Lingerie wasn't just a product to me, it was a passion. I worked my tail off and eventually, I was the proud owner of a chain of lingerie stores that spanned from cozy little boutiques to swanky outlets. Work was my life, and I was good at it, damn good. But you know how it goes, after stacking up those hours, days, and months into a neat pile of success, I started feeling like there was something missing. That's when Michael came into the picture. It was just a ping on my phone at first, a friend request from a guy with a sharp suit and sharper eyes, judging from his profile picture. I didn't know him, but a quick peek through his profile showed a man who seemed to have it all together, a lawyer, which explained the fancy suit. Curiosity got the better of me, and I hit accept. It wasn't long before his first message popped up one evening while I was balancing my accounts. Michael. Hey Emma, thanks for accepting my request. Noticed we have a few friends in common. How's it going? Simple enough, right? But it was his follow-up messages that really got me. He was witty and had a way of making me laugh, even after a long day. I remember one night, we were chatting about something stupid, like the worst pickup lines we'd ever heard, and his humor just clicked with me. Michael, ever had this one? Are you a magician? Because whenever I look at you, everyone else disappears. Bet you heard that one in your line of work. Emma, oh, for sure, top of the cringe chart. My comeback? Are you a photographer? Because I really want to lead this shoot. He laughed, or at least, he typed out a laugh. Hard to tell, but it felt genuine. After a few weeks of chatting, he suggested meeting up in person. Just a casual coffee, to put a real face to the text, he said. It sounded good to me. The first time we met, it was at this little dive that I loved, because they didn't skimp on the caffeine. He was already there when I walked in, scanning a newspaper. He looked up, and that sharp-eyed, professional profile picture did him no justice. He was better in the flesh. Emma? Wow, you actually look like your pictures. That's a rarity in this city. Well, thanks. I think you're not so bad yourself, despite the lawyer vibe. He laughed, and that icebreaker just melted away any awkwardness. We talked for hours. It wasn't just fluff either. Michael had depth. He asked about my business, my dreams, and really listened, to what I had to say. The thing about Michael is, he never did anything by halves. When we'd been seeing each other for a year, he decided it was time to take things to the next level. I was closing up shop one chilly evening when he showed up unannounced, his breath misting in the cold air as he held out a small, velvet box. "Emma, I've been thinking," he started, and boy, did he look nervous. "We've been doing great, you and me. I think it's time we thought about making this a permanent deal." I froze, the keys to the store still in my hand. "Michael, are you saying what I think you're saying?" He cracked a smile, that charming, lopsided grin that always made my heart skip. "Yeah, I am. Marry me, Emma. Let's not play around anymore. I want you as my partner, for good." My heart was racing, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. Marriage? Was I ready? But looking into his eyes, seeing the earnestness there, it felt right. "Yes," I breathed out. "Yes, I'll marry you." But then he shifted, his expression turning serious again. "There's something else, though. We need to talk about some legal stuff. Prenup stuff." The word prenup hit me like a bucket of ice water. "Prenup? Really, Michael? Is that necessary?" He hurried to explain, holding my hands in his to stop them from trembling. "Listen, it's not that I don't trust you, Emma. It's just practical, especially with me being a lawyer. I've seen too many messy splits not to be cautious. Plus, it's going to protect both of us." "What kind of protection are we talking about here?" I asked, my voice a mix of curiosity and concern. Michael pulled out some papers from his briefcase. "It's straightforward. If either of us cheats, the cheater loses their assets to the other. Simple and fair. You know I wouldn't cheat on you, Emma. This is just a safety net." I took a deep breath, trying to process it all. The romantic proposal now tangled up with talk of cheating and assets. It wasn't how I pictured my engagement. But then, life with Michael wasn't ordinary, and maybe this was just another part of that. I looked down at the papers, then back at his face, reading the sincerity there. "All right, I'll think about it. But let me be clear, Michael, I'm not planning to ever give you a reason to use this against me." "That's all I'm asking for," he replied, relief washing over his face. We went out to celebrate that night, and despite the weird mix of emotions, the evening was perfect. The restaurant was cozy, the food delicious, and Michael was attentive, making me laugh and forget about the legalities for a few hours. Later, as we walked back to the car under the stars, Michael stopped and pulled me close. "You know I love you, right? No piece of paper's gonna change that." I nodded, resting my head against his chest. "I know, Michael. I love you too. Just, let's make sure this prenup thing doesn't mess us up, okay?" He kissed the top of my head. "It won't. Promise." And that was it. I signed the prenup a few days later, after reading it over with my own lawyer, just to be sure. It felt weird, signing a document that talked about the end of a marriage when ours hadn't even begun. But love's a gamble, and I was all in. I just hoped my bet on Michael was the right one. We were the couple everyone envied, always laughing and whispering to each other at parties. But a few months in, things started to change. It wasn't something I could put my finger on right away, just a chill that settled over us slowly. The real trouble started a few weeks later. We were out shopping, and I was looking for some new scents in a perfume shop. I chatted with the sales guy, just casual talk about fragrances. When we left the store, Michael was fuming. "Who was that?" he barked as soon as we were clear of the crowded mall. I was taken aback. "The sales guy? I was just asking him about the perfumes. Why?" "Seemed like you were really into him," Michael shot back, his eyes hard. "Are you serious right now?" I stopped walking, staring at him in disbelief. "I was talking about perfumes, Michael. What's gotten into you?" He scoffed, shaking his head as he started walking again. "Nothing. Forget it. Let's just go home." But it didn't stop there. It got worse. Anytime I talked to a man, Michael would sulk or make snide comments. He became colder at home, too, retreating behind his laptop or phone, leaving me to eat dinner alone most nights. One evening, I decided to confront him. I couldn't stand the icy atmosphere anymore. I found him in his study, staring blankly at a spreadsheet. "Michael, we need to talk," I said, standing in the doorway. He didn't look up. "About?" "About us. About how you've been acting lately." I walked over and closed the laptop in front of him. "You've been distant, and any time I interact with another guy, you act like I've committed some crime." He rubbed his temples, sighing heavily. "Emma, you don't understand the pressure I'm under at work. And when I see you, laughing and chatting with other men, it gets to me, okay? And sometimes, I feel like you don't respect our relationship enough to keep your distance." We stared at each other, the air thick with unsaid things, and the echo of our raised voices. But then, something new stirred the pot. Rumors from friends started trickling in, saying Michael had been telling people I was a flirt, chatting up other men whenever he turned his back. I couldn't believe it. "You've been talking about me behind my back? Telling people I flirt with other guys?" "Look, Emma, it's not like that. I might have said something here or there, but it's only because I see how they look at you, how you—" "Stop." I cut him off, my anger peaking. "I don't believe this. You have no right to spread lies about me. You're supposed to be my partner, Michael, not my biggest critic." After that last big fight, things between Michael and me cooled off a bit. One morning, I found a note from Michael on the kitchen counter. His handwriting, usually so precise, looked rushed this time. I picked it up, my heart pounding a little harder than usual. "Emma, let's try to start over. Meet me at the Grandview Hotel, room 204, at 8 p.m. tonight. Let's put the past behind us and move forward. M." I stared at the note for a long minute. This was unexpected. Maybe this was his way of reaching out, trying to mend things. I decided to go, hope fluttering in my chest like a fragile bird. The day dragged by. Work was a blur. I couldn't focus on the customer orders or the inventory. My mind kept drifting back to the note, to what the evening might bring. Could we really start over? By the time I shut the shop and headed to the hotel, I was a bundle of nerves. When I arrived at the Grandview, my palms were sweaty. I checked my reflection in the car mirror, fixed my hair, dabbed on a bit of lipstick. Not too much. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard. Room 204 was on the second floor. The hallway was quiet, just the soft hum of the air conditioning. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, then, with a hesitant hand, turned the doorknob. It was open. The room was dimly lit by a bedside lamp, casting long shadows across the bed. There was an open bottle of wine on the table, 2 glasses beside it, and a small plate of fruit slices. But no Michael. "Michael?" I called out, stepping inside, letting the door click shut behind me. "Are you here?" Silence. Just the soft whir of the air conditioner. I thought about leaving, but then I decided to wait. I poured myself a glass of wine, the red liquid swirling in the glass. "Just 1 glass," I muttered to myself, to calm the nerves. I took a sip, the wine rich and a little too sweet. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. The wine was starting to make my head a bit fuzzy, or was it my nerves? I lay back, just to rest my eyes for a moment. The room spun gently, and then everything went black. When I woke up, it was dark outside. I tried to sit up, but my head was pounding, and my thoughts were foggy. My phone was on the nightstand. I grabbed it, the light from the screen blindingly bright in the dim room. I checked the time. It was past midnight. Panic clawed at my chest. I tried to remember what happened, how I ended up lying here, but it was like grasping at smoke. I realized with a start that I was not dressed, lying there without my clothes. I called Michael, my fingers trembling as I dialed his number. The phone rang, then, his voice, cold and distant. "Emma? What's up?" "Michael, where are you? Why didn't you come to the hotel?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Hotel? What are you talking about, Emma? Are you drunk? Have you lost your mind?" I'm at the Grandview, like you told me. Why did you ask me to come here if you weren't going to show up? My voice rose in anger and confusion. Emma, I don't know what sick game you're playing, but I didn't write any note. I've been home all night. You're out of control, running around with your lovers. I even thought about calling the police. Driving home from that disastrous night at the hotel, my mind was in turmoil. Michael's cold, dismissive voice on the phone replayed over and over in my head. What was happening? It felt like I was being sucked into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. As I pulled into the driveway, the familiar sight of our home brought no comfort, only a knot of dread in my stomach. I stepped inside, and the tension hit me like a wave. Michael was pacing the living room, his face twisted in anger. As soon as he saw me, he exploded. There you are. The wandering wife returns, he yelled, his voice dripping with scorn. Michael, please, we need to talk. Something very wrong happened tonight. I pleaded, my voice shaky but desperate to make him understand. But he wasn't listening. Instead, he slammed a stack of photos on the table. Explain these then, he shouted. I picked up the photos, my hands trembling. They showed me in a hotel room, in bed with a man I had never seen before. My heart sank. Michael, I don't know who this is. I swear, I've never seen this man before. Something happened to me tonight, something I can't explain. He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine. A monstrous mistake? Or just your monstrous behavior? Marrying you was the real mistake. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I fought them back, needing to stay strong, to stay clear-headed. I didn't do this, Michael. You have to believe me. But he wasn't done. Believe you? Why should I? You're a liar and a cheat. And I'll make sure you don't get a cent from me. I'm going to court, and I will take everything from you, as per our agreement. He spat out before grabbing his suitcase, already packed, and heading for the door. With a final glare, he slammed the door behind him, leaving me alone in the echoing silence of the house. I collapsed on the couch, my body shaking. The pain in my head was relentless, throbbing with an intensity that made it hard to think. But it was more than just a headache, it felt like my brain was foggy, my memories of the night blurred and inconsistent. That's when it hit me, the wine. I had only one glass, but the dizziness and the blackout didn't make sense. It was too extreme, too sudden. I grabbed my phone and dialed my friend Lisa, a nurse, hoping she could shed some light on my symptoms. Lisa, something's not right. I had a glass of wine, and then everything went black. I woke up hours later, and now Michael has these photos. It doesn't add up, I explained hurriedly, my words tumbling out. There was a pause on the other end as Lisa digested my words. Emma, it sounds like you might have been drugged. You need to get to a hospital or a lab and get tested right now. Tell them what happened, especially about the wine and your symptoms. The drive to the lab was a blur, my thoughts racing as I tried to piece everything together. At the lab, I explained the situation to the technician, who nodded solemnly and took several vials of blood. A couple of days after my visit to the hotel, a letter arrived with a heavy thud on my doorstep. It was from Michael. My hand shook as I tore it open, my worst fears confirmed in the cold, formal language of the legal notice. Michael was suing me for infidelity, aiming to strip me of everything I owned based on our prenuptial agreement. The trial was set for a month from now. I called my lawyer, Paul, immediately. His voice was a small comfort amid the chaos. Emma, come to my office. We need to strategize. I drove to Paul's office, my mind racing with every possible scenario except the one where I came out unscathed. As I pulled into the parking lot, my eyes caught a familiar figure, Michael, walking alongside a young man, the same one from the photos he had used to frame me. Without thinking, I reached for my phone and started recording. I caught them exchanging an envelope, the young man tucking it quickly into his jacket. My heart pounded as I realized the significance of what I might have just captured. At Paul's office, I showed him the video. His eyebrows shot up as he watched the exchange. "This is good, Emma. It's very suspicious. I think it's time we brought in a private investigator." Paul's friend, a seasoned private investigator named Jack, took the case. He moved quickly, tailing the young actor and digging into his background. A few days later, Jack called us into the office with news. "I've spoken to the kid," Jack started, his expression serious. "He's a bit of an actor, down on his luck. Said your husband hired him to play a part." "The part? Your lover." "He also confessed that your husband planned everything, even the drugged wine." As we were talking, my phone pinged with an email, my blood test results. I opened the attachment, my breath catching as I read the findings. Positive for a potent sedative, just as Jack had said. I passed my phone to Paul, who read the results and looked up, his eyes hardening with resolve. "This is it, Emma. This is what we need. With this evidence, we can not only defend you, but also turn the tables on Michael." Paul advised keeping everything under wraps until the court date. "Let's not tip him off. We'll hit him with this in court, give him the surprise of his life." A week had passed since the hotel debacle, and I was back in the familiar confines of my lingerie store, trying to keep my mind off the upcoming court date. It was a regular afternoon until Michael walked in, a woman on his arm. "Emma, meet Lila, my bride-to-be," he announced with a pride that didn't quite reach his eyes. Lila looked young, too young perhaps to understand the type of man she was dealing with. She glanced at me with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Michael wasted no time stirring up trouble. "Take a good look around, Emma. Soon enough, all this will be mine." His arm swept across the expanse of my store with theatrical grandeur, a smirk playing on his lips. Lila's eyes followed his gesture, her look hardening with more conviction. I wanted to reach out, to warn her, but I remembered Paul's strict instructions to keep quiet until the hearing. All I could do was smile thinly and respond with as much dignity as I could muster. "We'll see what the judge has to say about that, Michael." The day of the court session arrived all too quickly. The courtroom was austere, the air thick with anticipation. Michael, ever the lawyer, chose to represent himself. He stood, adjusting his tie, a clear show of self-assurance as he prepared to deliver his opening statement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael began, his voice steady and clear, "today you will see the true colors of a woman who not only broke the vows of marriage but sought to destroy the sanctity of our home with her deceit. As you will see from these photos," he continued, gesturing to the evidence displayed on the screen behind him, "my wife, Emma, was not the faithful partner she promised to be." The photos from the hotel room flashed up, eliciting murmurs from the courtroom. For months, I lived in torment, suspecting her infidelities. And finally, as these pictures show, my worst fears were confirmed. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink. He walked closer to where I sat, his eyes locked on mine. "Emma here would have you believe she's a victim, an innocent caught in circumstances beyond her control." His tone was scathing, his words rehearsed, but effective. "But I tell you, she is not a victim. She is a perpetrator, a destroyer of our union." As he spoke, I could see the calculated pauses, the measured glances at the judge, the way he laid out each sentence with the precision of a seasoned attorney. "The evidence is clear, undeniable. Emma's actions have caused irreparable damage, not just to our marriage but to the very fabric of trust that binds any relationship," Michael concluded, his speech crescendoing in a dramatic plea for justice. My lawyer, Paul, had a calm demeanor as he rose to address the court, his briefcase full of the evidence that would clear my name. "Your Honor," Paul began, his voice steady and commanding. "Today, we not only defend Emma Clark's honor but also reveal a pattern of deceit perpetrated by her husband, Michael Clark." He motioned to the back of the courtroom, and the actor whom Michael had hired walked in, his presence causing a stir among the spectators. Paul asked him to share his involvement, and the young man looked nervously around before speaking. "I was hired to act a part, I thought it was just a prank," he admitted, his voice shaky. "I didn't realize the seriousness of what was being orchestrated. Paul nodded gravely, then presented the blood test results to the court. These results show that Emma was incapacitated against her will, drugged by substances she had no knowledge of consuming. The courtroom murmured as the implications sank in. Furthermore, Paul continued, his tone hardening, this is not the first time Mr. Clark has employed such tactics. He laid out evidence of Michael's previous marriages, detailing how similar patterns had led to his unjust enrichment at the expense of his former wives. As Paul concluded his arguments, the weight of the evidence was palpable. We ask not only for the dismissal of the fraudulent claims made against Emma, but also for just compensation for the ordeal she has endured. The judge nodded, taking in everything before delivering her verdict. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, I find in favor of Emma Clark. The prenuptial agreement is hereby annulled. Relief washed over me, tears pricking my eyes, not just from the victory but from the vindication. Furthermore, the judge added, the court awards Mrs. Clark damages in the amount of $400,000. Michael's face was ashen, his future crumbled before him. His fiancée, present in the courtroom, hurried out, only to return briefly to whisper a thank you to me for exposing the truth before leaving him for good. The news of the trial spread like wildfire, the details sensational enough to hit the headlines. Michael's professional reputation was irrevocably damaged, he was stripped of his license to practice law. The revelation prompted his ex-wives to file lawsuits against him, uncovering a trail of deceit that left him financially and socially bankrupt. As I closed up shop one evening, the glow of the sunset casting long shadows on the floor, I reflected on the journey. The battle had been hard-fought, marked by moments of despair and indignity, but ultimately, it was a testament to resilience and justice. My name's Lila. I've always been the kind of person who prefers code to cocktails, a quiet evening over a raucous party. But life has a funny way of throwing you into the unexpected. That night at the party, hosted by a friend from college, was supposed to be another routine social gathering. I was already planning my escape route to my cozy apartment and my awaiting laptop when he walked in. David was hard to miss. At 22, he had the kind of energy that filled up a room. With his athlete's build and an easy smile, he was surrounded by admirers the moment he stepped through the door. I tried to keep to my corner, nursing my drink and fiddling with my phone, but fate had other plans. Hey, you're Lila, right? His voice cut through the noise, pulling me back from my digital refuge. I looked up to find those intense eyes fixed on me. Yeah, that's me. And you are? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. David Matthews, the rising hockey star everyone seemed to talk about. David, I've heard a lot about you. You're the genius programmer at Turner Tech, right? His grin was infectious, and I found myself smiling, despite my initial resolve to remain disinterested. Genius might be stretching it, but yeah, I work for an IT company, I said, trying to play it cool. David chuckled, pulling up a chair next to me, uninvited but not unwelcome. So, what brings you to a party where you clearly wish you were anywhere else? I shrugged, looking around at the bustling room. Guess I was trying to be social. My friends keep telling me I need to get out more. That's funny. David leaned in, his voice dropping to a playful whisper. Because I've been trying to get out of these things too. Too much fake chatter. You want to escape? Let's grab some real food, this party stuff is just fluff. I hesitated. This wasn't my usual style, but there was something about David that felt different, genuine. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, like he really saw me, not just the quiet girl in the corner. As we sneaked out of the party, the cool night air felt like a splash of clarity. We ended up at a 24-hour diner, the kind with greasy fries and endless coffee. David ordered the biggest burger on the menu for us to split, and I found myself sharing stories about coding mishaps and server crashes. David listened, really listened, nodding and asking questions that showed he got it, even if he didn't know a router from a modem. It was refreshing, talking to someone who didn't glaze over when I geeked out about technology. As the night turned into early morning, I realized that David wasn't just a hotshot athlete, He was thoughtful, funny, and surprisingly down to earth. Maybe that's why when he suggested we do this again next Friday, I didn't think twice before saying yes. David and I had been the talk of our circle since he started courting me. Despite our age difference, with me being 32 and him only 22, there was something electric between us. Honestly, it was flattering to have someone so vibrant and full of promise by my side. The day David decided to introduce me to his mom, Susan, I was nervous. The moment we arrived, the look on her face said it all. It was like she had tasted something sour just seeing me. "So, you're Lila," Susan began, sizing me up as if I were an item at an auction. "David has told me very little about you, which I suppose isn't surprising." I tried to smile, extending my hand. "It's nice to meet you, Susan." She barely touched my hand before pulling back. "Let's sit down. We have a lot to discuss, apparently." As we sat in her meticulously decorated living room, the air thick with tension, Susan didn't waste any time. "David tells me you two are planning to marry. He's a professional athlete, on his way to becoming a star. And you, Lila, you're a programmer, correct? And quite a bit older than him." "Yes, I am a programmer," I replied, keeping my voice steady, despite her tone. "And yes, there's an age difference, but we love each other." Susan scoffed. "Love," she muttered under her breath. "David, she's 32. You're just 22. You should be thinking about your career, not settling down with someone who—" "Mom," David interrupted, his voice firm. "I love Lila. That's what matters to me. We're getting married." Susan's eyes narrowed. "You're blinded by infatuation. Think about your future, your contracts, your endorsements. This is a mistake." I felt a surge of defiance. "I'm not here to argue, Susan. I came because David wanted us to meet. I respect your concern, but our decision to marry is ours to make." David nodded, squeezing my hand under the table. "Exactly. We've talked this through, and we're serious. Lila's age, her job, it doesn't matter to me. What matters is how we feel about each other." Susan leaned back, her expression unreadable for a moment before she spoke again. "Well, it seems I can't convince my own son to think clearly. If you're going to be part of this family, Lila, I expect you to understand the pressures David will face. Can you handle that? Without dragging him down?" Her words stung, but I held my gaze. "I'm not here to drag anyone down, Susan. I support David fully, in his career and everything else." There was a pause, a heavy, uncomfortable silence, before Susan stood up abruptly. "I need to think about this. David, you're welcome to stay for dinner. Lila, I think it's best if you leave now." David started to protest, but I stopped him. "It's okay, David. Let's not make this harder. I'll go, but think about what I said, Susan. I'm not the enemy here." When I found out I was pregnant, I was over the moon with joy. David was thrilled too when I told him, and he immediately suggested we speed up our wedding plans. "Let's not wait, Lila. Let's get married as soon as we can," he said, his eyes shining with excitement and a bit of urgency. The joy of our news, however, didn't quite extend to everyone. When David broke the news to his mom, Susan, her reaction was less than enthusiastic. "You're what? Pregnant? This changes things," she muttered, clearly agitated by the unexpected twist. David tried to calm her down. "Mom, this is good news. We're happy." Susan paced the room, her brows furrowed in thought before she turned to face us with a stern look. "Fine, but if you're going to do this, you're doing it on my terms. First, you two are signing a prenup." "A prenup?" I echoed, my stomach sinking. "Yes, to ensure my son's future earnings in hockey are protected. He's going to be making millions, and we can't have any risks," Susan explained, her voice firm and non-negotiable. David looked at me, his expression apologetic. "Lila, I know it's not ideal, but my mom has a point about protecting the career I'm building. It's just a formality." I nodded slowly, the reality of our situation settling in. Okay, what's the second condition? I asked, bracing myself. You need to show your commitment to this family, Lila. I want you to handle the initial mortgage payment for your new house, 50% up front. Susan's eyes were locked on mine, challenging me. I was stunned. 50%? That's a lot of money, Susan. David was quick to jump in. Mom, that's too much. Lila, we can figure something out. But I knew what I had to do. I called my dad later that day, explaining the situation and how much I needed. Without a moment's hesitation, he agreed. I'll help you, Lila. It's important you start your married life on stable ground, he said, transferring $200,000 to my account. With the financial and prenuptial conditions met, we moved forward with the wedding plans. The day arrived faster than I had anticipated, filled with a mix of emotions. Our wedding was beautiful, set in a quaint little chapel with flowers everywhere, and our closest friends and family gathered. I walked down the aisle, my heart full of love for David and our future together. My parents looked so proud and happy, their smiles beaming across the room. But there, off to the side, stood Susan with a look that could only be described as sour. Throughout the evening, her displeasure was evident. She wore a tight smile as guests congratulated her, her eyes often darting towards me with undisguised disapproval. Despite her attitude, David and I tried to focus on the positive. We mingled with guests, laughed, danced, and celebrated our union and the little life growing inside me. After the wedding, it didn't take long for life to take a sharp turn into the unexpected. Susan declared she'd be moving in with us, supposedly to help me through the early stages of pregnancy. I wasn't keen on the idea, but to avoid any drama, I reluctantly agreed. Little did I know, this decision would soon transform my home into a battleground where peace was a rare commodity. Within weeks of moving in, Susan had taken over the house. It was subtle at first, a few items moved here and there, some new decorations. But soon, her presence and influence grew stronger, more invasive. She didn't do much in terms of actual housework or helping me. Instead, she spent her days shopping with the money David made from his hockey career, filling our already cozy home with lavish furniture and expensive clothes that reflected her taste, not ours. One afternoon, as I was trying to rearrange some of these new additions to make space for my own things, Susan walked in, her eyes scanning the room critically. Lila, what are you doing? You're just moving things around without improving anything. You should focus more on resting and less on these useless activities, she snapped, her tone harsh and condescending. I bit my tongue, holding back my frustration. I'm just trying to make some space, Susan. It's getting a bit crowded in here. Crowded? This is quality, Lila. These are things a proper home should have. You should be thankful, she retorted, waving a dismissive hand at my simpler decorations. Feeling the sting of her words, I tried to keep my cool. Susan, I appreciate your help around the house, but maybe we could tone down the shopping a bit. There's hardly space to move. Susan's eyes narrowed, her voice cold. I'm only trying to bring some standard to this place. If you can't see that, it's not my problem. You should focus on what's important, like taking care of David. The remark hit harder than expected, and I felt a mixture of anger and helplessness. This wasn't the home I had envisioned for us, filled with love and mutual respect, but rather, it was turning into a showcase of Susan's tastes and preferences. Later that evening, when David got home from practice, I decided it was time to discuss the living situation. David, we need to talk about your mom, I started, my voice steady but filled with concern. What about her? He looked tired, rubbing the back of his neck as he sat down. She's taking over the house, David. And she's constantly criticizing me, making me feel like I'm not doing enough around here. I explained, hoping he'd understand. David's face hardened, and he sighed deeply. Lila, she's just trying to help. You know how she is. She wants everything to be perfect. You should try to get along, show her some respect. As the days turned into weeks, Susan's dominance in our home grew. My attempts to reclaim some sense of normalcy or to assert my preferences were met with cold resistance from Susan and frustrating neutrality from David. The more I tried to adapt, the more isolated I felt within my own walls. It was a routine morning, and I was at the clinic for a regular pregnancy checkup, expecting nothing but good news. But the doctor's face told a different story as he reviewed the ultrasound images. "Lila, it seems there's a significant developmental issue with the fetus. I recommend further tests, but you need to be prepared for all possible outcomes, including the possibility of not carrying to term." The drive home was a blur, and walking into the house, I was met by Susan's scrutinizing gaze. "Well, what did the doctor say?" she demanded, her tone more intrusive than concerned. I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. "It's not great news, Susan. There are complications. The baby might not make it." Susan's reaction was cold, almost mechanical. "I see. Well, you need to think about what's best, for you and for David. Sometimes these things are for the best." Her words stung, but I had no energy to argue. I needed David, his support more than ever. When he finally came home, I told him everything, the tears I had held back now freely streaming down my face. David looked devastated, but his words were hollow. "I'm so sorry, Lila. We'll get through this. Whatever you need, I'm here." But as the days went on, David's promise felt empty. He seemed distant, retreating into his own world, leaving me to cope with my grief and fear alone. Meanwhile, Susan's true colors came out more vividly than ever. One evening, as I sat in the living room, trying to find some distraction in a book, Susan sat across from me, her eyes sharp. "Lila, you need to think about the future. If this pregnancy isn't going to work out, maybe it's a sign. Maybe it's time you and David reconsidered your situation. A childless marriage is bound to fail." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Anger boiled inside me, but before I could respond, David walked in. I looked to him for support, but instead of defending me, he stayed silent. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, the day came when the complications of my pregnancy could no longer be managed. The doctors did what they could, but the decision was inevitable. The pregnancy had to be terminated. As I lay in the hospital bed, coming to terms with the loss, the doctor explained the gravity of my condition. "It's going to be difficult for you to get pregnant again," he said with a somber look. Returning home was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I was drained, not just physically, but emotionally. My heart ached in a way that words couldn't describe. I walked through the door in tears, a mess of grief and broken dreams, hoping, praying for some semblance of comfort from the people who were supposed to be my family. What I walked into was anything but comforting. Susan wasted no time. As soon as she saw my state, her words sliced through the air, cold and sharp. "Well, look at you. I told you, didn't I? You just aren't cut out for this. You can't even manage to have a healthy child." Her cruel words hit me like physical blows. I stood there, stunned into silence, my tears falling faster. I looked to David, desperate for him to say something, anything in my defense. But David was distant, his eyes avoiding mine. He shifted uncomfortably, then said, "Look, Lila, I have important matches coming up. I can't have all this drama around. It's just too much." I stared at him, disbelief clouding my pain. Our child was not just some drama, David. This was our baby, our future. How can you be so cold? David's face hardened. "I'm tired, Lila. Tired of your complaints and all these problems. I've got a career, and honestly, I've got plenty of options." He paused, his voice dropping as he added, "Maybe it's better if we just end this. I need someone who fits into my life, not complicates it." Susan clapped her hands, a twisted smile on her face. "Finally, some sense from you, David. Lila, you heard him. Pack your things. It's time for you to leave." David didn't help me with my bags, he didn't even say goodbye. As I closed the door behind me, the finality of that click echoed in my heart. When I arrived at my parents' house, my tears hadn't stopped. Seeing me in such a state, Dad was furious. "What happened, Lila? Tell me everything," he demanded, his voice a mix of concern and anger. Through sobs, I recounted everything, how Susan and David had treated me, the cruel words, the demand that I leave the house we shared. Dad's face turned red with each detail I shared, his fists clenching at his sides. "This is not going to stand, Lila. We're going to make sure you get what you deserve," he said, pulling out his phone to make a call. Within hours, he had lined up meetings with some of the best lawyers in the city. The next few days were a whirlwind. We met with a sharp and determined lawyer named Helen, who was appalled by my story. "We'll file for divorce immediately and sue for half of every investment you made in that house," she declared, her tone fierce and resolute. True to her word, Helen moved quickly. The divorce papers were served to David, and the lawsuit for my share of the house investments was filed. David and Susan were shocked. As the legal battle ensued, it became clear that they were in a precarious financial situation because of my mother-in-law's ill-considered spending. David and Susan were forced to sell the house. Meanwhile, David's life seemed to spiral. He met a young fan, a girl who was smitten with the shining star, and married her hastily. I heard about the wedding through friends. It didn't sting as much as I thought it would. Instead, it felt like confirmation that leaving him was the right decision. But Susan couldn't resist one last jab. A few weeks after David's rushed wedding, I received a letter from her. Inside was a photo from the wedding, showing Susan beaming next to David and his new wife. On the back, Susan had written a note. "Finally, my son has found a young and healthy woman who will give birth to healthy children for him." The cruelty of her words was meant to wound, and it did, but not as deeply as she intended. The lawsuit dragged on, but eventually, the court ruled in my favor. I was awarded half of the investment we had made in our former home, a sum that significantly strained David's finances further. 2 years have rolled by since I last walked out of that house, feeling broken and betrayed. A lot has changed since then, especially for me and my dad's company. We've been breaking into the international market, and my work paid off in a big way. I received an international award in IT technology, a recognition that came with a prize of $1 million. Just when I thought things were settling down, my phone rang. The screen flashed a number I didn't recognize at first, but the voice that greeted me was unmistakably Susan's. "Lila, you need to come back to David," she stated bluntly. "No hellos, no how have you been." I paused, taken aback. "Susan? Why would you think I'd come back?" Her voice was sharp, tinged with desperation. "David's been injured, a bad accident during a match. He's in a wheelchair now, can't play anymore. His wife left him, took half of everything. We need you." Her words were a jolt, but not enough to shake the foundation I'd rebuilt. "And you think I should return because of his injury? Why, Susan? Just because I have money now?" She didn't hesitate. "You're rich now, Lila. You can afford to take care of him. And me. I'm willing to let bygones be bygones. I'll even cook for you and let you have children, imagine that." I couldn't help but laugh, a short, bitter sound. "Susan, do you hear yourself? You want me back as some sort of nursemaid to David and his financial backer to you, just because I won money? It's always about money with you." Susan's voice cracked, angry and sharp. "You owe us, after everything." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see. "I owe you nothing, Susan. I built my life again from scratch, without any help from you or David. You threw me out when I was at my lowest. Why would I ever think of coming back?" There was a silence on the other end, heavy and thick. Then Susan spat out, "You're making a huge mistake, Lila." "I made my mistakes, Susan, but I learned from them. And returning to a life that nearly broke me isn't a mistake I'll make twice," I replied, my voice calm and steady. Hanging up the phone, I felt a surge of freedom. Her words no longer had the power to hurt me. I was truly free, and my life was my own. Looking around my office, filled with awards and the buzzing of computers, I knew I was right where I was meant to be. Later, at home, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto my balcony, looking out over the city lights. The challenges of the past seemed like distant memories, and the future was bright and full of promise. I had found success and contentment in my work, and I was surrounded by people who valued and respected me. As I sipped my wine, I thought about Susan's call, her voice so filled with anger and desperation. It was clear that in her world, money still dictated worth. But in my world, I measured wealth not by dollars in the bank, but by the happiness and peace I'd fought so hard to achieve. One crisp morning, as I walked into the office, the buzz of the upcoming product launch was palpable. My team, a group of brilliant and driven individuals, greeted me with enthusiastic updates. "Lila, we're almost ready to roll out the new software. Just a few tweaks left," Jenna, one of our lead developers, informed me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "That's great to hear, Jenna. Make sure those tweaks are solid. We can't afford slips, not with so much riding on this," I replied, my tone both encouraging and firm. Jenna nodded, her demeanor serious. "Absolutely, Lila. We're on it." I received a call from Dad later. His voice was brimming with pride. "Lila, I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of you. Not just for your success at the company, but for how you've handled everything life threw at you." "Thanks, Dad. It means a lot to hear that from you. I couldn't have done it without your support," I responded, feeling a warmth spread through me. "You did the heavy lifting, kiddo. I was just here to offer a hand when you needed it," he said, and we both laughed. That evening, as I walked through the park on my way home, I felt a deep sense of peace. I stopped for a moment, taking in the beauty of the setting sun, the laughter of children playing nearby, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was moments like this that I had once thought were lost to me forever. But here I was, standing strong, the master of my fate once more. I had faced betrayal and loss, fought back against those who sought to bring me down, and emerged not just unscathed, but stronger. As I resumed my walk, a plan began to form in my mind. I wanted to use my experiences to help others who might be facing their own battles. Perhaps a foundation, something that could offer support and strength to those in need. Let me introduce myself. I'm Amelia, living in a sprawling house just at the city's edge. I own a pet supplies company and a big retail supermarket focused on pets. Animals? They've been my entire world since I was little. Always found myself caring for some creature or another, which led me to where I am now. It was a cool, crisp evening when James walked into one of my charity events. He was there to write a story, standing awkwardly by the side, holding his notepad like a shield. I walked over, breaking into his space with a smile and a hand stretched out. "Hey, I'm Amelia. Haven't seen you around here before. You new?" He took my hand, a bit surprised, then flashed a quick, somewhat nervous smile. "Yeah, James Mitchell. I'm covering this event for the local paper." "You're Amelia Carter, right? The one who runs all this?" "Guilty as charged," I chuckled, brushing a stray hair from my face. "Hope we're giving you something good to write about." "Oh, definitely." His eyes scanned the room, filled with volunteers and the happy chaos of an event in full swing. "This is impressive, what you've put together." "Thanks. We're all about giving back. Plus, I can't stand seeing animals in trouble. You got pets?" He shook his head. "Travel too much. Wouldn't be fair to the poor thing." We chatted more about the event, and he asked insightful questions that told me he did his homework. His genuine interest was refreshing, and as the night wore on, I found myself looking forward to his calls and texts. Fast forward 6 months, and we're standing under a simple yet elegant arch, exchanging vows. I remember thinking how wild it was that life could throw such good things my way when I least expected it. A year into the marriage, and my business was booming. The house felt even more alive with every stray I brought home. James, ever the intrepid journalist, kept bringing stories of his travels into our conversations, making our dinners lively and full of laughter. One night, I was closing up shop when a lady rushed in, just as I was about to turn the sign to "closed." She was clutching a cardboard box so tightly her knuckles were white. "Excuse me, are you Amelia?" she gasped, out of breath. "Yeah, that's me. What's up?" She thrust the box into my hands. "Found these kittens behind my house. I can't take care of them, but I heard you could help." Peeking into the box, I saw 4 tiny, mewling kittens, their eyes barely open. "I got them, don't worry. They'll be safe here." "Thank you so much." She looked relieved, almost on the verge of tears. I just didn't know what else to do. After she left, I settled the kittens into a warm blanket in the back, ensuring they were comfortable. That night, as I told James about them, he just shook his head in wonder. "You ever gonna say no?" he joked, pouring us both a glass of wine. "Not when it comes to this. You know that." After the wedding, life started spinning faster than I ever imagined. The business was booming, and James's career as a journalist was on the rise. Every piece he wrote seemed to turn to gold, and his trips became more frequent. Despite the hectic pace, the day we found out I was pregnant was the day everything else seemed to pause, just for a moment. The positive test was like a beacon, cutting through the fog of our daily grind. "James, we're going to be parents," I murmured, my heart hammering in my chest as he swept me into his arms. "Yeah, babe, we are," he whispered back, his eyes bright with something like wonder. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Morning sickness hit me hard, and running the store became a daily challenge. James was supportive, always popping in when he could, bringing me ginger tea and those little crackers that were the only thing I could stomach some days. When Lily was born, it felt like a storm had passed, leaving the world shiny and new. But complications during the delivery cast long shadows. The doctors said I couldn't have more kids, a blunt statement that hung heavy between James and me in the sterile silence of the hospital room. James's disappointment was a quiet thing, but it stretched wide and deep. He tried to hide it, but sometimes I'd catch him staring out the window with a far-off look, or he'd be unusually quiet during dinner. "James, talk to me. Please," I'd plead, reaching for his hand across the table. "I'm fine, Mel, really. Just tired, you know?" But his voice would be flat, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. When Lily turned 1, it was clear she was the light of my life. She had my eyes and James's easy smile. Teaching her to walk, to say her first words, it was a joy unlike any other. But James, he was there but not really. He'd smile and play with her, but his smiles didn't quite reach his eyes. Lately, James had started taking more business trips alone and was often late coming home from work. This shift left me with quieter evenings, which I spent nurturing Lily. She was my little ray of sunshine in the increasingly gray days of my marriage. At just 5, she was already reading children's books and even little notes I left around, which I wrote to spark her curiosity and love for learning. Our bond was my solace. As for James and me, our relationship had cooled considerably. He had taken to sleeping in another room, claiming he needed to get up early for work without disturbing me. My attempts at conversation, trying to bridge the widening gap between us, were met with curt responses or tired dismissals. It was past midnight when I was jolted awake by Lily, her small hands shaking me urgently. Her face was lit with a mix of fear and excitement as she tugged at my arm. "Mommy, come quick. There's a baby outside, I couldn't bring him in, he's too heavy," she blurted out, breathless from either the run up the stairs or the weight of her discovery. I was half in a dream, not fully grasping her words. "A baby? Lily, it's probably just your imagination. Let's get you back to bed." But she was insistent, pulling me with more strength than I thought her little hands could muster. "No, Mommy, he's real. I saw him at the front door." Reluctantly, I followed her down the stairs, my mind racing. At the door, there it was, undeniable and shocking. A baby boy, wrapped snugly but abandoned in a portable cradle right on our doorstep. This was a first for me. I'd taken in countless strays, but a child? Lily was peering into the cradle with a curious gaze. "Look, Mommy, it's a boy. He's my brother." I knelt beside the cradle, my heart sinking. "Lily, sweetheart, this isn't our baby. Someone must have left him here by mistake." But Lily was persistent, her small face serious as she said, "No, Mom, there was a note. It said he's Daddy's son, so he's my brother." Before I could respond, James appeared, his face unreadable in the dim porch light. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice tinged with a forced casualness that didn't sit right with me. Lily was quick to answer, "Daddy, it's your baby. The note said so." James let out a stiff, uneasy chuckle. "You must have dreamt that, kiddo. There was no note." Lily's brow furrowed, frustrated. "There was. But now it's gone." James's eyes met mine, something fleeting in his glance that I couldn't place. He turned to Lily, his tone firm, almost harsh. "It's late, Lily. Go to bed now. We'll sort this out." "But Daddy." "Lily, bed. Now." James interrupted, pointing sternly towards the stairs. Lily, crestfallen and muttering, trudged back upstairs. I turned to James, my voice low and urgent. "We need to call the police, James. This is serious. We can't just keep someone's child." He was quick to dismiss me, his whisper sharp. "Let's not overreact. We could take him in, couldn't we? After all, it's a boy, just what we wanted." His words stunned me, the implication chilling. "James, are you listening to yourself? This is a child, not a stray pup that wandered in. We're talking to the police." His face darkened, and he stepped closer. "No police. We're not involving them. I'm going to bed." Once James retreated to his room, I managed to calm the little one. As he slept, I carefully snipped a few locks of his hair, planning to get a DNA test done. This wasn't a decision I took lightly, but my gut told me it was necessary. The next morning, I acted like everything was normal. I watched as James left for work, his demeanor unreadable. Once he was gone, I called the police. They came and took the baby to ensure he was cared for properly. That evening, when James returned and discovered what I had done, he exploded in anger, making a huge scene. "Why would you call them? We could have handled this ourselves," he yelled, his face red with frustration. His reaction only deepened my suspicions. I kept my calm, though, not letting on how much I already suspected. "It's the right thing to do, James. That child could have a family looking for him," I said, trying to reason with him. His responses were evasive, spinning more questions in my mind. I decided then to reach out to a private detective. Meanwhile, I also realized we might need money for all these expenses, lawyers, detectives, who knew what else. So, I checked our joint bank account. My heart sank when I saw it nearly empty. $30,000, saved for Lily's education, gone. I confronted James over the phone. "Where's the money from our account?" "The $30,000? I asked, my voice firm, trying not to let the anger show. "Oh, that. I had to help my brother out, he was in some serious debt," James stammered, his explanation sounding rehearsed. Right then, I knew he was lying. Not wanting to show my hand just yet, I simply replied, "I see." But internally, I was seething. This confirmed my decision to hire the detective. With my personal savings, I took the baby's hair and some from James's comb to a clinic for DNA testing. The process was straightforward, but waiting for the results was agonizing. During that time, I tried to keep things normal at home, especially for Lily's sake, but the atmosphere was tense. 2 weeks later, I received the call from the clinic. The results were as I feared, the child was indeed James's son. I said nothing to James, waiting instead for the detective's report to see the full picture. A week after getting the DNA results, I met with the detective. James had an affair with a woman who then gave birth to his son. They had planned to be a family until she met someone wealthier and decided to abandon the child with James, disrupting her new plans. The detective explained everything in a low, even tone, but each word was a hammer to my heart. "Once she found the other guy, your husband's son became inconvenient. That's why the baby ended up on your doorstep. With the address from the private detective in hand, I drove to the mistress's apartment, a mix of anger and disbelief churning inside me. The whole ride there, I kept thinking about the baby, about James, and about the betrayal that had unfolded so shockingly. When I arrived, I didn't even hesitate at the door. I knocked sharply, my heart pounding in my chest. The door swung open, and there he was, James, looking like he'd seen a ghost. The color drained from his face when he saw me. "What are you doing here, Amelia?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I pushed past him into the apartment, my eyes quickly finding the woman who had turned my life upside down. She was as I imagined, only now wearing a panicked look as she saw me. "I'm not here to cause a scene," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I just want to know one thing. How could you leave a baby, your baby, alone on the street like that?" The mistress, her back stiffening, responded with a shrug that made my skin crawl. "I didn't want the child. James wanted a son, so I left him with you guys to raise." Her nonchalance about the whole thing infuriated me, but before I could reply, the doorbell rang. She looked visibly shaken, moving quickly to answer it. A man entered, confusion written all over his face. "Who are these people, Julia?" he asked, his tone cautious. Julia, the mistress, forced a nervous laugh. "Oh, they're just some friends. They were just leaving." But I couldn't let this go, not now. I stepped forward, meeting the eyes of the man who clearly expected a different kind of evening. "I'm James's wife, and this is our life she's been meddling with. She left her newborn with us because she thought she could get rid of the baby that easily when she found you," I said, the words bitter as they came out. The man, now pale, turned to Julia. "Is this true?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, no lies coming to her aid this time. The man's face hardened as he looked from her to James and then back to me. "I want no part of this," he said, and without another word, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hall. James tried to reach for me, his hands outstretched, pleading. "Amelia, please, I can explain. There's nothing you can say that will fix this. I'm filing for divorce." I cut him off, my voice trembling not just with anger, but with a profound sadness. Julia's eyes were on James now. "Don't leave me, not now. We can be a family, with our son," she begged, desperation coloring her every word. The cynicism of her plea, the ease with which she shifted her allegiances, it was all too much. I turned to James, my decision clear. "I can't do this anymore." Without waiting for his response, I left the apartment. My next stop was the police station. I filed a formal complaint against James's mistress for abandoning her child, an act that endangered his safety. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic, but his face was etched with the seriousness of the situation. From there, I went directly to the custody service. I argued fervently that the mistress should be stripped of her maternal rights. The caseworker assigned to the case took notes intently as I spoke. "We'll need to conduct a thorough investigation. It will take time," she explained. "I understand, but please consider the child's safety above all," I urged, the image of the abandoned baby still vivid in my mind. Feeling like I had started a necessary process, I then turned my attention to the impending legal battle with James. I contacted a lawyer, one recommended by my best friend who had gone through her own divorce. The lawyer, Mr. Green, was a stout man with a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately made me feel I was in capable hands. "We'll need a strong strategy, especially if you're seeking financial compensation and custody," Mr. Green said during our first meeting. "I want to ensure my daughter's future is secure, and I want back every penny James took from our joint account," I declared, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Mr. Green nodded, jotting down notes. "The total amount withdrawn was $30,000, I answered. "He used our savings, money that was meant for our daughter's education, for the needs of his mistress. That's a substantial sum. We'll also pursue alimony, given his lack of interest in co-parenting, and compensation for adultery," Mr. Green added, already flipping through his calendar for court dates. The legal proceedings that followed were lengthy and grueling. In court, James and his mistress were defensive, their behavior erratic. The judge frequently reprimanded them for their conduct, which ranged from interruptive outbursts to outright disrespect. On one particularly tense day in court, after James had tried to explain away his actions with feeble excuses, I had my turn to speak. "Your Honor, he not only betrayed our family but also mismanaged our finances, jeopardizing our daughter's future," I stated clearly, meeting the judge's gaze. "I seek full restitution and appropriate alimony to provide for her upbringing." When the final gavel came down, it was a relief. The judge awarded me the full $139,000, citing the clear financial misconduct and James's lack of participation in parenting. He also granted me custody of Lily, with James required to pay alimony. The money, when it finally came through, was immediately set aside for Lily's education. It wasn't just a victory in court, it was a promise to my daughter that I would always fight for her, no matter what. One crisp morning, I sat down with Lily at our kitchen table, her small fingers clumsily spreading jam on her toast. She looked up at me with those big, curious eyes, her brow furrowed in thought. "Mommy, why don't we see Daddy anymore?" she asked, her voice soft and uncertain. I paused, considering how to explain the complexities of adult problems to a child whose world shouldn't have to include such worries. "Well, honey, sometimes people need a little time apart to understand how to be the best they can be," I started, trying to keep my tone light but honest. "It doesn't mean Daddy doesn't love you." Lily nodded, taking this in. "Do you still love Daddy?" The question stung a little, not out of pain for James, but for the innocence Lily still held. "I'll always care about him, because he's your dad. But sometimes love changes, and that's okay." A year after everything came crashing down, life finally seemed to find a rhythm again. Lily and I had settled into our new reality. The store was thriving, and the community around us had rallied in ways I'd never imagined, supporting both our business and our spirits. Then, one sunny afternoon, I received a call that would change the course of our lives once more. It was from the custody service. The news was heavy. My ex-husband's mistress had been stripped of her parental rights, and shockingly, James hadn't stepped in to take his son, despite all his previous claims of wanting a boy to carry on his name. The little boy was placed in an orphanage. My heart broke hearing that. No child should have to go through such abandonment. I talked to Lily about it that evening. "Lily, you remember the little boy we found on our doorstep? Your brother?" I started, unsure how to approach the topic. "Yeah, Mommy. Is he okay?" Her small face was filled with concern. I sighed, gathering my thoughts. "He's in an orphanage, sweetheart. His mom can't take care of him, and your dad, he isn't there for him either." Lily looked thoughtful for a moment, then her expression hardened with resolve. "Can he come live with us? He's my brother." Her innocence and compassion were overwhelming. "Would you like that?" I asked, although her mind seemed made up. "Yes, I want to help him. He's family, right?" Her certainty made up my mind. The next day, I contacted the custody service to inquire about the process of adopting him. The paperwork was daunting, the road filled with legal intricacies, but the thought of that little boy alone in the world propelled me forward. The months that followed were a whirlwind. I visited the orphanage regularly, each time my heart aching at the sight of so many children without families. James's son, Ben, was a quiet, watchful child. Each visit, he grew more accustomed to me. One afternoon, as I was leaving, he tugged at my hand, his small voice calling after me, "Mommy, will you come back?" His words struck a chord deep within me. "Always, Ben. I'll always come back for you." It took 6 months of visits, meetings, and countless signatures before I got the call. The adoption was approved. I was overjoyed and terrified all at once. I rushed to the orphanage to tell Ben the news. When I arrived, he was playing in the yard, his little figure dwarfed by the big toys around him. As I approached, he spotted me and ran over, his small arms lifted in anticipation. I scooped him up, spinning him around. "Guess what, Ben? You're coming home with us. You're going to be my son and Lily's brother for real," I told him, my voice thick with emotion. Bringing Ben home felt like mending a piece of my heart I hadn't realized was still broken. Lily embraced her role as big sister with a fierce tenderness that only a child could muster. Watching them together, playing, arguing, and just being siblings, filled the house with a chaotic but joyous energy. Ben started school this year, and watching him head off with his backpack almost as big as he is, it fills me with pride. He's adjusted well, and his teachers all say he's a joy to have in class. Lily, ever the protective big sister, always checks on him during their school breaks, making sure no one picks on him. Running the pet store keeps me busy. It's more than just a job, it's a passion. I've expanded our services, hosting community events, and even starting a small adoption center in the back. Watching families come in and leave with a new pet, knowing they're going to a good home, it's incredibly rewarding. As for James, I haven't seen him since the divorce was finalized. I heard through the grapevine he's moved out of state after losing his job and breaking things off with his mistress. Part of me is curious about how he's managing, but mostly, I don't want any part of that drama anymore. My focus is here, with our children, with our life. The other day, Lily and I were repainting the kitchen, a project we decided to tackle together. Ben was at a friend's house, so it was just us girls, splattering paint and sharing laughs. "Mom, do you ever miss things being the way they were before?" Lily asked, her brush pausing mid-stroke. I considered her question, paint can in hand. "Sometimes, I guess. But I love our life now. Don't you?" She dipped her brush in the paint. "Yeah. It's better now. Ben's here, and we're happy. It's just different, that's all." "Different can be good, sweetheart. We've gotten through a lot, and here we are, stronger than ever," I reassured her, giving her a playful nudge with my elbow. Later that week, I had a meeting with the local animal shelter about partnering for an upcoming adoption event. After the meeting, as I was closing up for the day, I took a moment to look around at the life I'd built. From the bustling store filled with customers and their pets, to the community notices pinned up next to the register, to the photos of Lily and Ben at their latest school event. This was my world now, and it was a good one. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the floor of the shop, I locked up and headed home, ready to spend the evening with my kids, maybe watch a movie or play a game. Life had thrown us some curveballs, but here we were, catching every one and throwing them right back. I'm Emma. I landed my first real job as an accountant at D&M Construction right out of college. My desk was buried in the back corner of the office, a tiny space crammed with piles of invoices and contract agreements. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. It was during one of those late evenings when I first met Michael. I was wrestling with an especially stubborn printer that decided to jam when he walked by. He was the new head of the project department, and he had that sort of aura that turned heads, a confident stride and a sharp suit. "Need a hand?" he asked, noticing my battle with the paper tray. I looked up, slightly embarrassed. "Yeah, this thing hates me." Michael chuckled and stepped closer, his hands skillfully navigating the guts of the printer. "These machines have a mind of their own." "Thanks," I sighed as he pulled out a crumpled sheet of paper. "I'm Emma, by the way." "Michael, I've seen you around. You're the one making all the numbers work, right?" He flashed a grin that made me forget about the printer for a moment. We continued to see more of each other, and our casual meetings started to feel like the best parts of my day. Michael was easy to be around, charming, yes, but also genuinely interested in what I had to say. One Friday, as we were leaving the office together, Michael stopped me by the elevator. "Emma, would you like to go out tomorrow? Maybe see a movie or grab some dinner?" A few months into our dating, Michael decided it was time I met his parents. He still lived with them in a small, cozy apartment cluttered with family photos and keepsakes. The anticipation of meeting them was nerve-wracking, not just because they were his parents, but also because I knew they held traditional views about success and roles within a family. As we stepped into the apartment, the smell of homemade food welcomed us. Michael introduced me with a proud smile. "Mom, Dad, this is Emma, the woman I told you about." His mother, Linda, scrutinized me from head to toe, then offered a stiff smile as she shook my hand. "So, Emma, where do you work?" she asked, her voice laced with curiosity but somehow sharp. "I'm an accountant at D&M Construction," I replied, trying to sound confident. "An accountant, huh?" His father, George, chimed in, leaning back in his chair. "Well, our Michael is the head of new projects. Quite a significant role, right, Michael?" Michael nodded. "Yeah, Dad, but Emma's job is crucial too. She handles a lot of the company's finances." Linda and George exchanged looks, their expressions unreadable. "Yes, but you're the one with the career that's going places," Linda said, turning her gaze back to me. "An accountant is nice, dear, but Michael is making real strides in the company." The air thickened with that statement, and I forced a smile, feeling my stomach twist. It was clear they saw a hierarchy where their son stood on top, and I was just there. The dinner progressed with small talk and an undercurrent of judgment. I could tell they were assessing my every word, my every move, to see if I measured up to their expectations for their son. Not long after that uncomfortable dinner, Michael popped the question in our favorite park. It was surreal. There he was, down on one knee, with the most earnest look in his eyes. My joy was palpable. "Yes, Michael, yes." As we started planning our life together, the bubble of our engagement was pricked by the reality of his parents' influence. One evening, while Michael was helping his mom with dishes after another dinner at their place, Linda pulled me aside. "Emma, dear," she began, her voice low and serious, "Michael has a promising future. And with such a future, we just think it's wise to organize things properly." "What do you mean, organize?" "A prenuptial agreement, dear. It's just practical," she explained, her tone implying that it was a foregone conclusion. The word hit me like a ton of bricks. "Prenup? Are you suggesting I might go after Michael's money?" "It's not personal, dear. It's precautionary," she answered, her voice soft but firm. When Michael and I were finally alone in the car, I couldn't keep it in anymore. "Michael, your mom wants us to sign a prenup." He didn't seem surprised. "Yeah, she mentioned it to me too. It's just a safety net." He tried to reassure me, reaching out for my hand. I pulled away, feeling betrayed. "Feels more like a trap, Michael." He looked hurt. "It's not a trap. It's just how my family handles things. They want to protect what we're building." The rest of the ride was silent, each of us lost in our thoughts. At home, Michael brought out the prenup papers. They lay on our kitchen table, like an uninvited guest. "Look, Emma, it's straightforward. We'll both be protected," he said, attempting to bridge the gap between us. I leafed through the document, each clause tightening the knot in my stomach. "This doesn't protect us, Michael. It protects you from me." "We can change anything you're not comfortable with," he offered, but his voice lacked conviction. We spent the next few hours going over every line, negotiating terms that felt less like a betrayal. It was tough, arguing over hypotheticals that felt like they could tear us apart. But by the end of the night, we forged something that looked less like his parents' will and more like a mutual agreement. Adjusting to married life in our little rented apartment came with its own set of joys and challenges. At first, everything felt new and exciting, even the mundane tasks of setting up home and figuring out who does what. Michael and I fell into a comfortable routine, filled with small celebrations of our new life together. At work, I kept on with my accounting duties, just another face among many in a large company. But things started to shift when, a year into our marriage, my boss, Mr. Thompson, called me into his office. He was a man of few words, and even fewer smiles. "Emma, you've been pulling some impressive numbers. I see potential in you," he said, his voice gruff, but not unkind. I was taken aback, unsure of what this meant. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I appreciate your confidence in me." "It's not just confidence," he continued, shuffling papers on his desk as if looking for evidence of my hard work. It's fact. I'm promoting you to chief accountant. The promotion came as a shock, but it was a welcome one. I couldn't wait to share the news with Michael, thinking he'd be thrilled. When I told him over dinner, his reaction was mixed, a smile, yes, but there was a hesitation in his eyes. That's great, babe. Really? Chief accountant, huh? He said, trying to keep his voice upbeat. Yeah, can you believe it? I replied, excitement bubbling in my chest. Sure. It's just, you'll be making more now, right? A lot more than me, he added, his tone shifting slightly. I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. Hey, this is good for us, for our future. It's our success, not just mine. Michael nodded, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Yeah, of course. Just don't go bragging to my folks, okay? They still think I'm the high flyer in the family. I agreed, not wanting to cause any family tensions. Your secret's safe with me, I assured him with a light laugh, trying to keep the atmosphere easy. But as the months rolled by and my responsibilities increased, so did the gap between Michael's perception of our careers and the reality. Another year passed, and another promotion landed on my lap, this time to financial director. The gap in our incomes widened, and Michael's jokes about my rich wife became more frequent, each one stinging a bit more than the last. One evening, I overheard Michael on the phone with his mother. No, Emma's just the same, still crunching numbers. Yeah, she likes it well enough. I stood frozen outside the room, the words hitting harder than expected. He hadn't told them about either of my promotions. I confronted him about it later that night. Why haven't you told your parents about my job? About how well I'm doing? I asked, feeling both hurt and angry. Michael sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, Emma, it's complicated. Dad, he's got these old-fashioned ideas about success and who provides in the family. I knew he was right about his parents, but it didn't make the deception easier to swallow. We're supposed to be a team, Michael. It feels like you're ashamed of what I've achieved. The conversation lingered in the air, unresolved. We were a team, but at that moment, it felt like we were playing on different fields. I knew I had to be understanding, but part of me also needed Michael to step up and own our reality, not just the one his parents wanted to see. Living with Michael had its ups and downs, but what really started to wear on me was the financial strain caused by his parents' constant demands for money. Before we got married, Michael lived with them and took care of all their expenses. Now that we were on our own, I had hoped that would change, but old habits die hard. One evening, as I was sorting through our monthly bills, I noticed that the numbers just weren't adding up. We seemed to be bleeding money faster than I could account for. Michael, we need to talk about our finances, I said as he walked in from work, looking tired. What's up? He asked, dropping his bag by the door and sinking into the couch with a sigh. It's about the money going out every month. I'm paying all the bills and the rent, and it's starting to add up. Aren't you contributing to any of these? I asked, trying to keep my tone even but feeling my frustration bubble. Michael rubbed his temples and sighed. Look, I've been helping my folks out a lot lately. They've had some extra expenses, and, well, I can't just leave them hanging. But that's all your money going to them. What about us? Our future? I pressed, needing him to see the full picture. I know. It's just temporary. Things will stabilize, he reassured me, but his voice lacked conviction. This temporary seems to be stretching indefinitely, Michael. Your mom even tells people that you're the one supporting me, and that's far from the truth, I countered, feeling the sting of each word. Michael looked away, the weight of the situation sinking in. I'm sorry, Emma. I owe them a lot. They raised me, and it feels wrong to turn them away when they need help. But at what cost? We can't even plan for anything because we don't know how much of your paycheck will go to your parents each month, I argued, my worry growing as I thought about our future. He didn't have an answer, just sat there looking as lost as I felt. The conversation was going nowhere, and it left a sour taste in my mouth. The next time we visited his parents, the tension was palpable. His mother, Linda, made a point of mentioning how Michael had been their rock, hinting at how much he'd been helping them out. "We don't know what we'd do without Michael. He's been such a support, not just emotionally but financially too," she said, glancing my way with a sharp smile. As days turned into weeks with no change, I began to wonder if we'd ever find our way out of this mess, or if the weight of his obligations to his parents would always overshadow our plans and dreams. As time marched on, the idea of buying our own place started to seem more like a necessity than a luxury. I broached the subject with Michael one night while we were cleaning up after dinner. "Michael, I've been thinking," I started, wiping down the counter. "Maybe it's time we looked into buying a house. Renting is just throwing money away every month." Michael paused, drying a plate slowly. "A house, huh? Yeah, that sounds great, but do we have enough for a down payment?" "I've been saving up on the side. I think we might just have enough to get us through the door, if we tighten our belts a bit more," I replied, hopeful. He put the plate down and leaned against the counter. "That's incredible, Em. I didn't know you had that much set aside." "Well, I wanted it to be a surprise. But here's the thing," I continued, bracing myself for his reaction. "The down payment will mostly be from my savings. I mean, I want this to be our home, equally ours, but on paper, it'll look a bit lopsided." Michael's face fell slightly, and he nodded. "I get it. Your money, your rules. I just wish I could chip in more." "It's not about rules, Michael. It's our home. But legally, I think it would make sense to have the house under my name, just for now," I explained, trying to keep the conversation light but firm. Michael sighed, scratching his head. "Yeah, I guess that makes sense. As long as we're together in this, that's what counts, right?" "Exactly, we're in this together," I reassured him, reaching out to squeeze his hand. We started house hunting that weekend, and it didn't take long before we found a small, charming place that felt just right. Once the house was officially ours, I took on the mortgage payments, and we moved in. It felt like a fresh start, a real part of our future taking shape. But old habits and secrets don't just stay behind, especially not Michael's tendency to shield his parents from our reality. One evening, I overheard Michael on the phone in our new study. "No, Mom, the house is great. Yeah, Emma's really done well for herself. I'm keeping up, don't worry," he said, his voice low. When he came out, I confronted him. "Why do you keep doing that? Making it sound like I'm the one pulling all the weight." Michael flinched, then exhaled deeply. "I didn't mean anything by it, Emma. It's just easier this way. They think I'm doing well, too. Let's just enjoy our new home, okay? We'll deal with my parents later." I nodded, reluctantly letting the issue go, but it gnawed at me. Our home was supposed to be our sanctuary, not another stage for half-truths and tiptoeing around delicate egos. Life at home was tense after Michael's latest career hiccup. He was always on edge, trying to secure a promotion by hustling harder at work, making deals left and right. He seemed more desperate to prove himself, especially to his parents. One evening, while Michael was late again, caught up in meetings, I stumbled upon some documents sprawled across our home office desk. The top sheet caught my eye, a contract proposal with a company I recognized as recently declared bankrupt. Alarm bells rang in my head. Signing with a bankrupt company could jeopardize not only Michael's position but could also drag our company through the mud. When Michael finally came home, I confronted him. "Michael, what's this about signing with a company that's bankrupt? Do you realize the risks involved?" He brushed me off with a wave of his hand, his eyes glued to his phone. "I know what I'm doing, Emma. This deal could be a big break for me. But it's a reckless move. It could backfire on you, and on both of us. Please, think this through," I pleaded, hoping to get through to him. Michael scoffed. "Look, Emma, I get that you're trying to help, but I know how to handle my job. These are the risks we have to take in the business world." A few weeks later, my worst fears came true. Michael came home, paler than usual, slumping into a chair across from me in the kitchen. "I was fired today," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. I was furious and scared, but managed to keep my voice steady. "What are we going to do now? You know we have the mortgage and all our other bills." Michael was quiet, then he looked up with a desperate sort of determination. "Just, don't tell my parents, okay? They can't know about this. It would crush them." So I agreed, more out of shock than anything else, and we pretended nothing had changed when his parents called or visited. But now, with only my income, the financial strain was immense. I handled our expenses alone, feeling the burden of each bill. One day, Michael came to me, hesitant. "Emma, I need to ask you for something. It's about my parents, they need some financial help again. Could we?" I cut him off, unable to hide my frustration. "You want me to give more money to your parents now? When we're barely scraping by with your job gone and me covering everything?" Michael flinched. "It's just that they're really strapped this month, and I promised." "No, Michael. Just no. I'm stretched thin as it is. You need to sort this out. Find a job, any job," I snapped, the stress boiling over. He didn't say anything, just walked away, and we didn't speak for the rest of the week. Losing my mother was one of the hardest things I've ever had to endure. The only silver lining was the small house she left me, a quaint place where I had so many childhood memories. Not long after the funeral, my mother-in-law, Linda, brought up the house. "You know, dear, it might be best if you sold that little house. You could use the money to help us," she suggested during one of their visits. I was stunned by her audacity. "It's my house, Linda, and I'm going to keep it. I've decided to rent it out to help pay off our mortgage," I responded, trying to keep my cool. Linda frowned, clearly not happy with my decision, but she didn't push further at the time. I was too overwhelmed with work and managing our finances to handle the rentals myself, so I asked Michael to find us tenants. A few weeks later, he told me he'd found the perfect tenants, an elderly couple looking for a place just like my mom's house. Trusting him, I thought nothing more of it until a few months later when I realized that no rent had been deposited into my account. Concerned, I decided to visit the house and speak with the tenants directly. When I arrived, the sight before me was like a slap in the face. Michael's parents were lounging in the living room, completely at home. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. Linda looked up, not the least bit ashamed. "Oh, hello, dear. Michael said we could stay here. Isn't it lovely?" "I was expecting tenants who would pay rent, Linda. Not you living here rent-free." I shot back, feeling betrayed. "We're family, dear. We thought you wouldn't mind," she replied, her tone dismissive. I stormed out and called Michael right then and there. "Why are your parents in my mother's house? You told me you rented it out to an elderly couple." "They are an elderly couple, Emma. And they needed a place. You can afford to help out," Michael tried to justify over the phone. "This is not helping, Michael. This is taking advantage. I'm paying our mortgage alone, and now this? Your parents need to leave. Now," I said firmly, my decision absolute. Michael was silent for a moment. "Emma, they have nowhere else to go. They sold their apartment. They thought." "I don't care what they thought. They have until the end of the week to move out." I cut him off, too angry to care about anything else. The conversation ended badly, with Michael pleading and me standing my ground. When I confronted his parents again, telling them they needed to leave, Linda lashed out. "You can't do this to us, Emma. We're family. Where's your heart?" she cried out, her words bitter and cold. "My heart is trying to keep my head above water, Linda. You need to leave," I replied, my voice firm despite the tremor I felt inside. They didn't move willingly. I had to call the police to escort them out after they refused to leave by the deadline. Linda's parting words were venomous, cursing me and calling me heartless. Walking back into my own home after the mess with the police, I was hoping for some peace, maybe a moment to gather my thoughts. But the universe had other plans. As soon as I opened the door, the first thing I heard was the murmurs from the living room, my mother-in-law's voice unmistakably sharp. I dropped my keys on the hall table and walked in to find Linda and George sitting there, coffee in hand, chatting with Michael. Their expressions turned, fixing me with looks that ranged from accusatory to outright hostile. Michael stood up abruptly, his face red with anger. "How could you do that to my parents, Emma? Apologize, now." Linda chimed in, her tone dripping with disdain. "You've shown your true colors today, Emma. You're unworthy of our family. I think you should leave this house, it belongs to our son." And as if to twist the knife a bit deeper, she added, "Remember the prenup. You won't get a thing from us, and Michael will have the house." I stared at them, the absurdity of the situation almost laughable. Michael nodded along with his mother's words, a smug look on his face. "That's right, Emma. You're my wife, you should listen to me, obey me. If you don't, I'll leave you. And good luck without the alimony." I laughed. "You think I want anything from you, Michael? I agree to the divorce. In fact, I welcome it." Michael's face went pale, his confident stance faltering. "I was just, that was just a joke. Come on, Emma." But I was done. Turning to his parents, I laid it all out. Michael has been unemployed for over a year now. He lives off my earnings, in my house. I made the down payment, I pay the mortgage. Legally and otherwise, this house is mine. The color drained from Linda's face as she turned to Michael, who could only lower his head in shame, muttering, "It's true. I want all of you out of my house. Now. And don't come back," I said, my voice steady but my whole body shaking with the intensity of the moment. They were indignant, of course. Linda started to argue, but I was firm. "Leave now, or I call the police again." I heard Linda demanding Michael pay for a hotel, his quiet, defeated voice responding, "I don't have any money, Mom." Once they were gone, the weight of the confrontation hit me. I turned to Michael, who still seemed stunned by how things had turned out. "You should leave too, Michael. I'll send your things." That night, he left, and the silence of the house was both eerie and soothing. The divorce proceedings were straightforward. Michael didn't contest anything, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of resignation, perhaps out of the lack of money for a good lawyer. Now, living alone, I've regained a sense of peace and control. I rent out my mother's house, which helps cover the mortgage, and every decision, from the groceries I buy to the color I paint the walls, is mine alone. At night, I sit in the living room, the same room that once hosted so many painful confrontations, and I feel a deep sense of relief. I'm free. Free from the deceit, free from the control, and most importantly, free to build my life the way I see fit. Let me set the stage. I'm Elise, 33, translator for a big shot company that keeps me on my toes with languages I barely knew existed until they handed me the dictionary. My life's not your typical fairy tale, it's more a series of plot twists. I married straight out of college, thinking I'd nailed life. But fast forward a few years, the marriage tanked, big surprise, right? But it gave me the best thing ever, my daughter Lily, a Spitfire at 8, who has more wit in her pinky than most do in their entire head. Then, there's David, my current flame, or as I like to call him, Mr. Right the second time around. We bumped into each other at a dusty old book club. He was arguing about Hemingway's love of brevity, and I was all in for Fitzgerald's flair. Sparks flew over worn pages and tepid coffee. That was the start of endless debates and coffee dates. A year down the road, David popped the question at the same dingy coffee shop, with a ring as understated as our meeting. "Elise, will you?" He had started, all nervous, which wasn't his usual confident self. "Make your coffee every morning? Only if you promise to pick up your socks," I quipped, before slipping in a serious, "Yes, I will." But, as luck would have it, not everyone was popping champagne and tossing confetti. Enter Mrs. Thompson, David's mother, a tough nut with a stare that could curdle milk. The first time I met her, she looked me up and down like I was a sofa she regretted buying. "So, you're the one David can't stop yapping about," she had said, her voice sharp as a knife. "Guilty as charged. And you must be the famous Mrs. Thompson. David says you make the best cherry pie in town." From that day on, every visit was a chess game. She'd check my moves, always ready to declare a checkmate. But David was a gem. He'd squeeze my hand under the table, his way of saying, "Ignore her, I'm right here." One day, lounging on our rickety deck while David flipped burgers on the grill, he brought it up. "Mom's a bit old school, Elise. She's all about family legacy and that jazz. Yeah, and she's got it in her head that I'm done having kids. Thinks Lily's it and worries about the precious family line." I'd replied, the frustration bubbling up. David had put down the tongs, his face serious for once. I know. She's worried you won't want more kids. But whatever we decide, it's our business, not hers." Despite the gloom cast by David's mom, our wedding day was everything I'd hoped it would be, modest, but filled with joy. My daughter Lily was dolled up in a cute pink dress, practically floating around the venue, her laughter a melody that softened even the sternest hearts. Everyone we loved was there, smiling and cheering, except for one. Mrs. Thompson sat through the entire event with a face like she'd sucked on a lemon. She didn't even get up to congratulate us. Living with David, it felt like we'd hit the jackpot: warm, cozy evenings, and the constant buzz of a happy, albeit small, family. But as much as our home was filled with love, there was always an undercurrent of tension, thanks to one persistent storm cloud, Mrs. Thompson. One Saturday morning, while David was out running errands, Mrs. Thompson decided it was a good time to drop by unannounced. The doorbell rang just as Lily and I were in the middle of a heated Uno match. "Grams!" Lily shouted, dropping her cards and racing to the door. I followed more slowly, steeling myself. "Mrs. Thompson, what a surprise," I said, my voice polite but cool. She brushed past me without a greeting, her eyes sweeping the room like she was the health inspector and we were a restaurant on the brink of being shut down. "I was just in the neighborhood," she said, though we both knew she lived on the other side of town. "Thought I'd see what you all were up to without David around to supervise." As I headed to the kitchen, I heard her start in on Lily. "So, young lady, has your mother been keeping you busy, or are you just lazing around the house all day?" "We were playing Uno, and I was winning," Lily responded with a confidence I wished I could muster. "That's no real skill, is it? Why don't you read something more stimulating?" I returned with her tea, placing it on the coaster with a little more force than necessary. "Lily's top of her class, Mrs. Thompson. Uno's just for fun." Mrs. Thompson sipped her tea, making a face. "Well, as long as she's not falling behind. David tells me you're managing well enough, but I have to see it for myself. And making sure he's not burdened with more than he can handle is part of that." I sat down across from her, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "David isn't burdened. He's thrilled. We all are. This is our family now." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Well, I'll let David know my thoughts. He deserves to hear it from his mother." As she walked to the door, I followed, my voice firmer now. "David hears everything from me, Mrs. Thompson. We don't keep secrets or run reports to parents. We're adults, building a life together." She paused at the door, her back to me. "Just remember, Elise, I'm his mother. My approval might not mean much to you, but it means a lot to him." Trying to get along with Mrs. Thompson was like trying to smooth a crumpled paper. No matter how hard you try, the lines are always there. But for David's sake, I kept at it. One evening, I decided to host a dinner. Nothing fancy, just a casual thing to maybe melt some of that ice. "I'm making your mom's favorite tonight, cherry pie. Think it'll win her over?" I asked David as he helped me set the table. David chuckled, straightening a fork. "Mom's tough, but nobody can resist your cherry pie. Just take it easy, yeah? She can be, a lot." The plan was simple. Dinner at 6, pie for dessert, and hopefully some kind of truce by the end of the night. But as luck would have it, just as I pulled the pie out of the oven, looking golden and perfect, Lily's school called. "Mom, it's Ms. Carson. She says I left my project at school, and it's due tomorrow." Lily's face was a mix of panic and hope. Okay, we'll go get it. Can't have all your hard work go to waste," I said, glancing at the clock. "Mrs. Thompson would be here any minute." I scribbled a quick note for her, just in case we missed each other. "Back in 8. Make yourself at home." We rushed to the school and back, making it in just under 20 minutes. When we walked in, Mrs. Thompson was seated at the table, looking like she owned the place. David was pouring her a glass of wine. Dinner went by with the usual small talk. How's work, how's school, the weather, safe topics that kept the night from turning into a minefield. Then came the pie. I served everyone a generous slice, smiling a bit too eagerly. "Hope it's as good as you remember, Mrs. Thompson." We all took a bite, and immediately, Lily's face scrunched up. "Ugh, Mom, this tastes weird." Confused, I took a bite myself. My mouth was assaulted by a blast of salt and sour, a far cry from what I'd prepared. I looked up at Mrs. Thompson, who was watching me with a smug look. "This doesn't taste right, Elise. Did you follow the recipe properly?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "Of course, I made it just like..." I started, but then it hit me. She had been alone in the house. My eyes narrowed. David, noticing the tension, jumped in. "Maybe it's just a bad batch of cherries? Let's not sweat it. How about we order some pizza instead?" "Sounds great," I managed to say, my eyes still fixed on Mrs. Thompson. After David went to order the pizza, Mrs. Thompson leaned in close and whispered, "Maybe next time you'll think twice before leaving me alone in your kitchen." I was stunned. She had actually sabotaged the pie. I kept my cool, though. "Is this how you want to play it?" "Just making sure you know where you stand," she hissed back. The rest of the evening was a blur. Pizza came, we ate, and Mrs. Thompson left soon after, not a word about the pie. David seemed oblivious, happy even that we'd managed to salvage the night with takeout. Life after the pie incident felt like walking on eggshells, especially whenever Mrs. Thompson was around. But David, bless his heart, thought a change of scenery might do us some good. So, out of the blue, he comes home one evening, all smiles, waving a set of plane tickets like he's won the lottery. "Guess what, Elise? We're going on vacation. And not just any vacation, India," he announced, practically bouncing on his heels. "India? Seriously?" I couldn't hide my surprise. India had been on my bucket list for as long as I could remember. "But what about, your mom?" David's face fell a bit, then he shrugged. "Well, she's coming too. Thought it'd be good for all of us to spend some quality time together, bond a bit." I sighed, already dreading the drama, but not wanting to burst his bubble. "Alright, if you think it's a good idea. When do we leave?" "In 2 weeks. I got it all planned out. We'll see the Taj Mahal, ride elephants, the whole 9 yards. His enthusiasm was infectious, and despite my reservations, I found myself getting excited about the trip. The weeks leading up to the trip were a whirlwind of planning and packing. Lists, shopping, more lists. The night before we were set to leave, David and I sat down with a map and a guidebook, marking out all the spots we wanted to visit. "You really think your mom is going to ride an elephant?" I joked, trying to keep the mood light. David laughed. "I'd pay good money to see that." The day of the departure was chaotic. Bags everywhere, Lily running around in excitement, and Mrs. Thompson, well, she was her usual self, complaining about everything from the weight of her luggage to the timing of the flight. "Why does it have to be so early? And why India? It's so far and exotic," she grumbled as we loaded up the car. "Mom, come on, it's an adventure. Elise has always wanted to see India. We're going to have a great time," David tried to reassure her, giving me a wink. At the airport, Mrs. Thompson's mood hadn't improved. She fussed over her boarding pass, her seating arrangement, the lack of her preferred magazine at the airport shop. On the plane, Mrs. Thompson ended up seated separately from us, much to everyone's relief. She had managed to argue her way into an aisle seat closer to the front, away from our block of 3. As we soared above the clouds, heading towards an unknown experience, I couldn't help but wonder if this trip would bring us closer together or drive a deeper wedge. But ready or not, India awaited, and with it, a journey that was sure to be unforgettable. India was nothing short of an eye-opener, colors, chaos, and smells that could knock you sideways if you weren't careful. We'd been having the time of our lives, except, of course, for Mrs. Thompson, who found something to complain about at every turn. Still, David, Lily, and I were making the most of it, soaking up every experience. After a long day of sightseeing, we were back at the hotel, exhausted but happy. I was unpacking some of our stuff when I noticed Lily looking guilty, fidgeting next to her suitcase. "What's up, Bug? You look like you're sitting on a secret," I nudged her gently. She bit her lip, then pulled out a package from her bag. "Mom, look. Grandma gave this to me at the airport and told me to keep it a secret. She said it was a snack for when I get hungry." My heart sank as I saw the package. It was bacon. "Lily, sweetheart, you know we can't bring meat into the country like this, right? It's against the law here." Lily's eyes widened, teary. "I didn't know, Mom. Grandma said it was okay." Just then, David walked in. "What's going on here?" he asked, seeing the upset looks. I handed him the package, my voice tense. "Your mom snuck this into Lily's bag. It's bacon, David." "What? No, she wouldn't." His voice trailed off as he looked from the bacon to Lily's upset face. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do anything bad," Lily cried out. David knelt down and hugged her. "It's not your fault, honey. You didn't know." He looked up at me, worry creasing his forehead. "Elise, what are we going to do?" "First, we get rid of this properly. Then, we need to have a serious talk with your mother," I said, more annoyed than ever. David nodded, still shocked but supportive. "Yeah, okay. Let's handle this." We managed to dispose of the bacon without any issues, thankfully. But the mood was set for a confrontation. We found Mrs. Thompson in the hotel lounge, sipping tea as if she hadn't a care in the world. "Mom, can we talk?" David's tone was firm as he approached her, a sign he meant business. Mrs. Thompson looked up, her expression wary. "What is it now, David? Can't you see I'm trying to relax?" David didn't waste any time. "Why did you give Lily bacon to bring here? You know that's illegal. It could have gotten us in serious trouble." Mrs. Thompson scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please, it was just a few slices. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." "It's not about the quantity, Mom. It's about following the law." "And putting Lily in that position? Really?" David's frustration was palpable. I stepped in, unable to hold back. "Mrs. Thompson, what were you thinking? Putting your granddaughter in such a risky situation, just for what? A snack?" She bristled, defensive. "I was thinking of my granddaughter, unlike you, who drags her halfway across the world to places like this." "That's enough, Mom. You're not making any sense, and what you did was wrong. Plain and simple." David cut her off. The conversation went around in circles for a while, with Mrs. Thompson refusing to see reason. But David stood his ground, and I couldn't have been prouder. Later that night, in our room, David apologized for his mother's behavior again. "I'm sorry, Elise. I never thought she'd go this far. It's not your fault, David. But we need to be more careful with her. Who knows what else she might pull," I said, the day's events weighing heavily on my mind. David nodded, pulling me close. "We'll handle it, together. No more secrets, no more sneaking around. We're a team, right?" "Right," I agreed, feeling a bit better knowing we were in this together. Still, as I watched Lily sleep peacefully, unaware of the storm her grandmother had almost caused, I knew this trip was going to be more than just a vacation. It was a test of our family's resilience. Our trip to India turned out to be way better than I feared. We saw incredible places, and even Mrs. Thompson kept her cool, which made me think maybe I had been too harsh on her. By the end of our trip, I was almost relaxed about her being around us. Maybe, just maybe, we could all get along after all. The day we were to head back, everything seemed smooth. We were at the airport, luggage in tow, checking off the last items from our travel list. That's when Lily tugged at my sleeve, her face scrunched up a bit. "Mom, I need to go to the bathroom," she whispered. "Sure, sweetie. Let's go," I replied, turning to Mrs. Thompson. "Could you hold my bag for a minute?" She smiled, a bit too sweetly. "Of course, dear." Handing over my bag, I led Lily to the restroom, thinking nothing of it. When we came back, Mrs. Thompson was standing there, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips as she handed back my bag. "Thanks," I muttered, but something about her expression set off alarms in my head. I didn't dwell on it, just handed the bag to David. "Here, can you take this through? My hands are full." "Sure thing," he said, slinging it over his shoulder as we headed to the security checkpoint. Lily and I passed through first, easy and clear. I waited on the other side, watching as David placed the bag on the conveyor belt. That's when everything went sideways. The security officers at the monitor started whispering urgently, pointing at the screen before motioning David aside. 2 more officers approached, their faces stern. "What's going on?" I called out, stepping closer, but a security officer held up a hand to stop me. "Ma'am, please wait here," he said. Panic clawed at my chest as I watched them talk to David, his face growing paler by the second. Then, without warning, they escorted him to a small room off to the side. Mrs. Thompson rushed over and grabbed my arm, her earlier smugness replaced by concern. "Elise, what's happening? Why are they taking David?" I pulled my arm away, keeping my voice steady, despite the chaos. I gave him my bag to carry through the scanner. "They found something in it, something that shouldn't have been there." Her eyes widened, and for a second, I saw fear flicker across her face. Without another word, she tried to follow the officers who took David, but the customs officials stopped her. That's when she lost it, her composure cracking like thin ice underfoot. "It was me. I did it. I put those things in her bag," she shouted, trying to push past the officers. The officers, now alert to a deeper issue, brought her back to where I was standing. They started asking rapid-fire questions. It was then that Mrs. Thompson broke down completely, crying and shaking as she confessed. "While Elise was with her daughter, I put the money and medicines in her bag," she sobbed, her voice echoing in the busy airport. "I wanted her to get caught, to be held back here while we went home." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was one thing to suspect your mother-in-law didn't like you, but another to hear her admit to framing you. The customs officers took us all aside to sort through this mess. As we stood there, with officers buzzing around, taking notes, Mrs. Thompson turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "Elise, I'm so sorry. I thought if you were out of the picture, David would come back, that he'd realize his mistake. But I was wrong, so wrong. Please, can you forgive me?" I stared at her, feeling a mix of anger and pity. "You didn't just make a mistake. You almost ruined our lives." The officers had listened to everything, and after confirming the story with the surveillance footage, they decided to release David. He came back to us, his face a mask of shock and relief. When he saw his mother in handcuffs, something inside him seemed to break. "Mom, how could you?" His voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the noise around us like a knife. "I wanted to protect you," Mrs. Thompson cried, trying to reach out to him. The police took Mrs. Thompson away to process her for the crimes she admitted to, leaving us in a bubble of stunned silence. As we headed to the gate to catch our rescheduled flight, I leaned on David, the events of the day replaying in my mind. His mother's actions were unforgivable, and as we walked, a plan began to form on how we would move forward, how we would rebuild the trust and safety that had been so severely shattered. Back home, the silence of our living room felt like a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of the airport police station. David and I sat with cups of tea that had long gone cold, the events of the past few days settling around us like dust after a storm. David broke the silence first, his voice low and weary. "I can't believe she'd go that far, Elise. I'm sorry you had to go through all that because of her." I looked over at him, seeing the strain in his eyes. "It's not your fault, David. But we do need to think about how we move forward from here. We can't let this slide." "Yeah, I know." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "The lawyer mentioned a restraining order might be necessary. Given everything, I think he might be right." It was a tough pill to swallow, the idea of legally barring his mother from our lives, but it was a measure of the severity of her actions. It would give us peace of mind, at least. She needs to understand the consequences of her actions, legally and personally. David nodded, rubbing his face with his hands. "Yeah, I'll call him tomorrow. Get it started. It's just hard, you know? She's my mom." I reached out, taking his hand. "I know she is. And this doesn't mean you don't love her. But we have to protect our family, David. We have to protect Lily." A few days later, the restraining order was in place. It was a surreal feeling, knowing that it had come to this. When David told Lily, he did it in a way that was gentle, but honest. "Grandma made some very bad choices, and for now, we need to make sure we're all safe," he explained to her. Lily nodded, her understanding far beyond her years. "Is Grandma going to be okay?" she asked, her small voice full of concern. "We hope so, sweetheart. We hope she gets the help she needs," I added, pulling her into a hug. Life started to settle into a new kind of normal. The days passed with fewer worries about unexpected disruptions, and slowly, the tension began to ease from our shoulders. Mrs. Thompson had spent 2 months in a local prison and was then deported back to the United States. The image of her, desperate and broken, was stark, but it was her actions, not mine, that led us here. Days passed, and the ripple effects of Mrs. Thompson's actions were felt throughout our wider circle of family and friends. People who had once been fixtures in our lives began distancing themselves from her. Her betrayal wasn't just personal, it was profound, affecting everyone connected to us. She lived alone now, isolated by her own deeds. It was a harsh reality, but a self-inflicted one. One evening, as we sat watching a movie together, wrapped in blankets and sharing a bowl of popcorn, David paused the movie and looked over at me. "Elise, I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. And I just want to say thank you. For being so strong, for being the rock for this family." I smiled, leaning into him. "I do it for us, for all of us. Because that's what you do when you love someone, you stand by them." As we resumed the movie, I looked over at Lily, her eyes heavy with sleep, safe in the knowledge that she was loved and protected. Reflecting on everything, I realized that family isn't just about the good times. It's about who stands with you during the trials, who holds your hand when the path gets rocky.